Welcome to Anime T23, where we dive deep into the most intriguing what-if scenarios in the anime universe. In today's episode, we explore a world where Naruto-Uzamaki, the future hero of Konoha, is neglected by his own family. But what if this neglect unlocked a hidden potential within him? Join us as we uncover how Naruto's loneliness transforms into his greatest strength. This is What If Naruto Was Neglected by His Family and Had Every Elemental Bloodline, Part 2. See time skip 4 years. I wanna die, Naruto thought to himself as he rested his hands on his drooping head. Finally, after 5 years, he will finally leave this hell known as the Academy. It wasn't just how boring it was how extremely boring it was. Sure, it made sense if a civilian would take these classes, or a newly born child of low-tier clans. They were barely teaching actual shinobi techniques, or jutsu, only the dubbed Academy 3 jutsu, that every child with a decent understanding of chakra could complete within their second year. Even the sparring was just a higher level of kids basically play fighting. They taught each kid the exact same taijutsu stance, a stance so bad that if you stepped 1 foot outside the village you would most likely die within minutes. And to throw oil onto an already burning fire. The acceptable passing grade for shuriken and kunai throwing was a April 10th. A 4. That's basically telling the students, now don't worry kids. If you can barely hit a stationary opponent, you surely won't hit one moving. Naruto visibly scoffed at his thoughts. Just the mere idea of the damned academy brought back awful memories. In the beginning, it was hard just being in his sibling's shadow, since almost every kid and teacher praised him for basically breathing. Even later on, he was getting overlooked for the more smarter kids in the class, like Sakura Haruno and Sasuke Uchiha. And ever since Natsu and Narumi graduated from the academy at the age of 8, a whopping 3 years earlier than normal, his siblings were labeled prodigies of their generation, while Naruto somehow got the title of dope, since he had no special power of a bijou like Natsu and Narumi, or even special training. And since their graduation, if possible, his parents managed to pull even further away from Naruto, spending most of their time and effort accelerating the training of the 2 Namikaze prodigies. While he didn't spend much time at his house anymore, he usually spent the night at Shikamaru's house, since they became fast friends after the talk on the cliff. He wasn't sure just how far exactly Natsu and Narumi were compared to him. While he knew he had gotten stronger, Naruto just didn't have the right training or a sensei to even teach him anymore, and it proved rather difficult to grow when it seemed like no one wanted him to. But he now had his trump card, the last gift that Shuriken had given him, the Sharingan. He first discovered that he had the Sharingan after he saw his 2 siblings wearing the village headband, finding out that they did in fact graduate early. It explained why he still had his left eye and only adorned a scar over his socket. Sure, Naruto wasn't 100% sure on exactly what happened that day, but he was certain he had lost his eye, and he technically did lose his eye. After he realized he had the Uchiha clan Dijitsu, he quickly rushed out of the house and to his signature training ground. While he really didn't know how to work the Sharingan, it felt like it was getting simpler and simpler as the days went by. Naruto groaned. He was slightly disappointed in his progress in actually using the Sharingan. He wasn't a master by any means. He would say he was about an average Uchiha genin when it comes to using it, but the feat was impressive for a non-Uchiha. He did add a lot more genjutsu to his arsenal, since he got the Dijitsu, since the element of surprise would benefit him greatly catching his opponent completely off guard. They would automatically be drawn to his eyes and bam, caught under a genjutsu without even realizing. That's part of the reason why no one knew that he had the Sharingan. He wanted to keep the element of surprise until he couldn't hide it anymore. Also, it wouldn't look too good if someone suddenly popped up having a Sharingan after the Uchiha massacre, especially a non-Uchiha. And even after getting close with Shikamaru, he still debated whether or not to tell the Nara genius. And he didn't tell his family for, well, obvious reasons, but the worst was keeping this a secret from Sasuke. While he and Sasuke weren't really best friends, they'd hang out from time to time. Strangely enough, it was Sasuke that came up to him first. 2 weeks have passed since the horrible Uchiha massacre, and since Naruto realized he now had a Sharingan implanted into his left eye, Naruto wanted to smile at that. The pain was still fresh. But the mere thought of Shisui giving him the most powerful Dijitsu did bring a smile to his face. Naruto smiled a sad smile, looking at his reflection in the lake. He was sitting on a pier with his feet dangling over the edge. His Sharingan eye was active, showing his 3 tomo as he stared at his reflection. Naruto let his thoughts drift off, letting the full moon shine down over the black abyss, illuminating the lake, giving a peaceful personality to the lake. While it was already past 11 at night, he knew his parents wouldn't be waiting up for him. That thought made Naruto frown. After his talk with his father in the hospital, it seemed that he wanted to finally reconnect as a family. Well, that was certainly the feeling that Naruto got anyway. While Minato did seem worried about Naruto's health when he was in the hospital, as soon as he got home, everything went right back to normal. If so, even got worse. Since Natsu and Narumi graduated early, more of his mother's attention got put into their training. His father was a little less involved since his duties as Hokage had been taking up most of his time since the massacre. Suddenly, a loud creaking sound broke Naruto out of his thoughts. After frantically deactivating his Dijitsu, he turned his head to see someone he wasn't expecting. It was Uchiha Sasuke, the lone survivor of the Uchiha clan. Naruto stayed silent as the black-haired boy walked over to him slowly. After a few more steps, he finally came to the blonde, his onyx eyes looking at Naruto's sapphire as he took a seat. Naruto looked away from Sasuke, the boy slightly awkward since he had never talked to the Uchiha before. Several minutes went by as they stayed silent, letting the warm breeze caress their bodies. The air was soothing, and it slightly helped Naruto calm his nerves. In the hospital, you mentioned something about Shirsu-san. Naruto blinked in sudden surprise at being addressed. The blonde looked over at Sasuke to see Onyx eyes almost glaring at him. Naruto pursed his lips. The sudden intensity Sasuke was sending his way was quite intimidating. Sasuke continued, "When you woke up, you said you wanted to stay with. Did you know him?" Naruto slowly nodded his head. He didn't know anyone else was in that room, thought just himself and the nurses. A small smile played on his lips. Shisui Nizen was the one who taught me everything I know. He basically raised me for almost 2 years. Sasuke raised a lone eyebrow at Naruto's words. Raised him? Coming from a son of a Kage, it made almost 0 sense. Sasuke questioned the blonde about what he meant. The answer he received stunned Sasuke. "My partners don't really include me in the family. Everything usually revolves around Natsu and Narumi." Sasuke simply stared at Naruto in complete shock. The Uchiha finally looked away, looking back at his own reflection in the crystal-clear lake. His eyes wandered over to the reflection of the boy sitting next to him. Noticing the large vertical scar over his left eye, making Sasuke feel something twinge within him. "You know it was my brother that killed the entire clan." The blonde snapped his head over to Sasuke in disbelief. Naruto's eyes softened. While he didn't know much about the massacre, only that Shisui didn't actually die in the midst of it all. All he knew was that Itachi is the one that committed the genocide. He had no idea Sasuke was related to him. "I came to you because Shirsu-san was Itachi's best friend. They did everything together." Naruto nodded. He did remember hearing Shisui bring up Itachi on more than one occasion. He pursued his lips yet again. He was most likely the only one to know that the Uchiha were planning a coup d'etat, thanks to Shirsui's letters. The thought to tell Sasuke right now quickly passed through his head, but it was kept a secret for a reason, and he would honor that secrecy of his sensei. "I hate him. I hate him so much. I want to avenge my clan and kill that bastard for what he did." That's not a good way to think about it. Sasuke glared over at Naruto, his head snapping over to him as he let out a snarl. His fists clenched so tight blood started to leak from his palms. "And what do you know? You only lost one person that day. I lost everyone that ever mattered to me." Naruto recoiled in slight surprise, but he managed to hold his ground and shake his head. "Shirsu Nizen once told me that it's okay to hate people, but you should never let that blind you from seeing what really matters," he said. making Sasuke falter slightly. The raven-haired child found it harder to maintain its glare. And what matters is that you had that special time with your family, a loving brother that is still out there somewhere, even if you hate him. I mean, you're still here, right? He said, making Sasuke go wide-eyed. The glare left the Uchiha's face as he processed every word Naruto sent his way. He never thought it like that. Naruto looked over at him and sent a sad smile his way, the pain shining off his two blue eyes. I never got that special time with my family that I've always wanted. And my brother isn't out there anymore. Flashback end. Ever since then, the Namikaze and Uchiha were not best friends. They did sometimes hang out together with Shikamaru, since Sasuke had nowhere to go and Naruto was seemingly not wanted. They all got along pretty well, since all of them were reserved in their own right. Naruto paused at his thoughts. Sometimes it was like they were actually completely alone, since neither Shikamaru or Sasuke were much of talkers. Naruto looked around his empty classroom. Most of the chairs were already long forgotten. There were only about 4 students counting himself as he waited to get called up. All he had to do was the basic Academy 3 jutsu. They already passed both the throwing portion and the written test last night. So the blonde waited for 1 hour to get called. He mentally sighed. Even in test form, he was almost at the very bottom. Next up, Namikaze Naruto. Naruto silently cheered as he jumped over his desk and down to the front of the room. The rest of the kids that were waiting to be called rolled their eyes. Most of the class didn't really care for the dope of the academy. His grades were just average and even below most of the clan heirs. So seeing Naruto attempt to show off, in their eyes anyway, left a bitter taste in their mouth. Naruto ignored the looks sent his way and entered the room where the academy instructors were holding the exam. Once he walked through the large door, he was met with his teachers for the past 5 years, Irika Yumino and Mizuki Suzo. Mizuki was just like everyone else. He showered Natsu and Narumi with unneeded praise and kept him in the dust to be forgotten. Irika was much better in the aspect of actually teaching all kids no matter who they were. While Naruto was still greatly overshadowed, Irika was the only one that gave him a chance to actually prove himself as a capable shinobi. And while his results were minuscule compared to his siblings, he still tried nonetheless. Okay, Naruto, you know the drill. Let's see what you can do. Naruto wanted to scowl at what Irika said. He's pretty sure Natsu and Narumi didn't have to go through all the miscellaneous shit that he had to do, like write a 4-page report on the importance of chakra. Without performing any hand seals, a clone of himself came to life right next to him. Within a few seconds, the clone of Naruto then was engulfed in smoke, turning into a perfect copy of Irika, down to the last detail. The real Naruto went to smack the clone on the head, before his hand made contact with the clone, then used a quick substitution with a chair that was in the corner of the room. Soft clapping sounds echoed throughout the tiny room as Mizuki offered a strainful smile. Thankfully, Irika looked real. The clone hinged as Irika dispersed itself, as Irika offered the boy a village headband. Great job, Naruto. Congratulating on finally graduating. Impressive move, making your clone do the required jutsu. But try not to show off so much. Naruto couldn't help but roll his eyes at that. He wasn't surprised in the least, but he knew if anybody else performed like that, it would call for bonus points. And on finally graduating, he scoffed. Even when they aren't here, he is getting compared to his siblings. Naruto held his hand out and shook his head. Irika raised an eyebrow at the blonde. Naruto then reached into his pouch on his leg and unclipped the hatch. After rummaging inside for a few moments, he pulled out the familiar headband that Shursui had given him all their years ago. The scared headband and the aged green cloth, making both Chunin raise an eyebrow. He tied the headband around his forehead, ignoring the looks of confusion sent his way. Oi, Naruto! Remember to come back in 1 hour for team assignments. Finally stepping outside, he felt a weight get lifted off his shoulder. He was free, finally free. It felt so good to finally be done with that hell. After a few seconds, outside, he saw his best friend with his arms folded leaning on a tree just outside. Naruto offered the Nara a small wave, making him push himself off the tree. Aw, how special waiting for your best friend after graduation. Shikamaru rolled his eyes as he scratched the back of his head, yawning as he did so. Well, Choji already went to see his parents, a pre-celebration with his family. So you're all that's left. Naruto grinned at his friend, throwing his arm around Shikamaru's shoulder, earning a yelp from the Nara. Please, we all know you love me. A sudden scoff reached both boys' ears as Sasuke walked over to him, his headband wrapped around his forehead. Naruto looked over to him in surprise. The Uchiha genius graces us with his presence? Did hell finally freeze over? Shikamaru nudged his friend in the ribs, making Naruto yelp. Sasuke glared over at Naruto and crossed his arms. Sasuke certainly has changed since the massacre. While at the start he was very cold and dark, swearing revenge on his brother for slaughtering his clan. But after his talk with Naruto on the pier, he changed again, and this time in a good way. He would never admit it to anyone, but he held Naruto in very high regards and respects him more than most people. He owes him that much since Naruto helped him out in a very dark time. Naruto was the only one that left an impression on him after all. Naruto wasn't nearly as gifted as his siblings, and after finding out what Naruto's life truly was, it made his respect for the blonde grow. Again, not like he would ever admit it. Whatever, Baka. And I see you graduated. Surprised you managed to make it through? Naruto narrowed his eyes at Sasuke's smirk. Shikamaru's side next to them. He could already hear the blonde's response in his head. Tsh, please, even second years could pass that test. At least most people scored higher than an 89 on the written test. And there it is. Shikamaru groaned to himself as he heard Sasuke rebuttal back full force. This year in the academy, Sasuke was the only clan heir to score below a 90% on the written portion on the graduation test. And Naruto was never one to pass up a chance to mess with Sasuke. Everyone knew how angry Sasuke got wherever someone mentioned it. Most people were too intimidated to say anything to the Uchiha genius. Everyone but Naruto. No matter the reason, no matter the conversation, the blonde always managed to find a way to slip it into day-to-day conversation. Naruto suddenly stopped mid-sentence as the trio looked over to the streets. Most of the gradation class turned over as screeches and yells echoed into the summer air. Naruto frowned as one of the last people he wanted to see came walking over to him. Sasuke flanked his right, while Shikamaru had his left, both having matching grimaces. They both know exactly how the Namikaze family treated their friend. To say they were disgusted was a true understatement. It made them nauseous down to their very core, to think that some people so prestigious would literally abandon a child. Heyo Toto, how did the graduation go? I see you managed to pass. The feminine voice belonged to none other than Narumi Namikaze, the only daughter, her headband secretly tied around her forehead. But the most distinguishing feature was not her headband. It was the dark Chunin vest she sported over her black t-shirt. Narumi offered her brother a smile, moving her eyes over the three newly made genin. The past 2 years have been very difficult for Narumi. It wasn't until she noticed that Naruto hasn't been home in literally months that something has been terribly wrong with her brother. And slowly but surely everything came crashing down on her like a pile of bricks, remembering exactly how their parents left Naruto, and how she never seemed to care. In truth, she felt like shit every time she saw the boy. It was a painful reminder of her failure as an older sister. She tried asking her parents about why they won't train or even acknowledge Naruto's presence. Not once has she gotten a real answer. So each time she brushed it off, still believing they have a real reason. Then there was their brother Natsu. He followed the example of his parents, and while he didn't ignore the blonde completely, he wouldn't treat him like a real brother either. And that was her biggest problem with both her brothers. She's had countless arguments with Natsu on trying to incorporate Naruto back into their lives. But each time it always failed, with either Naruto refusing to do anything with them, or Natsu getting fed up with Naruto's stubbornness. Naruto grunted at his sister, his eyes glancing everywhere else besides her. Yes, I did. Is there a reason you are here, Narumi? The red-headed girl quickly nodded her head as she forced back a frown. She took a few moments to respond. Well, I wanted to see how my little brother was before I left for my mission, she said, trying her best to sound as real as possible. Honestly, she did forget all about Naruto's graduation today. Luckily, she was leaving from the West Gate, or she wouldn't have seen the giant sign on the academy saying graduation. Besides, Narumi continued, I wanted to see how you were doing. Naruto shrugged his shoulders, turning on his heel. He scoffed, fine as I'll ever be. He spoke effectively, ending the conversation. Narumi frowned at Naruto's back. She wasn't surprised by his answer, but she was sorely disappointed. She gave a heavy sigh and soon left the academy grounds. She had a mission to get to after all. Shikamaru elbowed Naruto in the side softly, making the blonde turn to him. The Nara raised an eyebrow. You good man. Naruto once again shrugged his shoulders, the sudden anger already gone from his body. Sasuke snorted at his side. Hands rested in his pockets as they entered the academy classroom once more. Almost every seat was taken apart from a row of 3 in the front. Sounds of laughter echoed through the halls as kids talked loudly about finally graduating. But sadly, their presence did not get ignored. A few heads turned over to them, especially a head of pink and blonde. Naruto and Shikamaru gave a groan as they covered their ears. Sasuke Kun. Sasuke flinched at his name as 2 almost identical rockets came blasting off towards him. Naruto and Shikamaru took a few steps backwards, leaving Sasuke to his misery. The Uchiha sent them a pleading look, one of the only emotions he allowed his friends to see across his face. The pink rocket snuggled into Sasuke's right shoulder, emitting a moan of content from her lips, while the blonde was on his back, leaning on his neck. Sasuke-kun, I missed you so much. Did you miss me? Before he even had a chance to respond, the blonde on his back scowled. Like hell he would miss your forehead. We all know who he truly misses here. Oh yeah, Ino Pig? I bet he doesn't even know your name. You just said my name, Baka. Well, whatever, Ino Pig. Naruto shot an amused glance over at Sasuke. That would be Sakura Haruno and Ino Yamanaka, the 2 leaders of the Uchiha fan club. While most girls in the class praised the Uchiha, Sakura and Ino were the only 2 that actually vocalized it. Every single day. Sure, it was funny for a few days, seeing how bad they had it for Sasuke, and it was always fun to see Sasuke's misfortune. But now it turned to a basic obsession for Sasuke, and while the Uchiha was still miserable, no, it still made Naruto laugh. Thankfully, and luckily for Sasuke, the scarred Chunin from earlier entered the classroom. He saw the commotion in the center of the room, and his eyebrow twitched. He was so happy this year was over. Everyone shut up and pay attention. Irika smiled when now every student took their seats. He cleared his throat before he started talking. Okay, I want to say once again, congrats on graduating. Cheers broke out in the classroom. And this year the team assignments are a little different, he said, making the students raise their eyebrows in confusion. Irika walked around and turned the folder in his arms around, showing it to the class. Usually we assign new genin to their jounin senseis within the week. But this year's graduating class showed exponential growth and promised that Hokage-sama and I have decided that today is the day where we assign the teams. Teams 1 to 6 are fodder, we will skip them. Now Team 7 will be Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, and Ken Gasai. Sensei will be Kakashi Hatake. Sasuke's head fell forward and smacked his desk, while Sakura jumped up and down in happiness. Naruto shot Sasuke a look of pity before Irika continued. Team 8 will be Kiba Inazuka, Shino Abiram, and Hinata Hyuga. Sensei will be Kurenai Yuhi. All the clan heirs nodded their heads at their team. The more enthusiastic Kiba gave a happy yell. Naruto blinked his eyes, the familiar name sparking something within him. He gave a hidden smile. Looks like she passed the jounin exams. Sucks she couldn't have been my sensei. Team 9 is still in circulation from last year. So Team 10 will have Shikamaru Nara, Choji Akimichi, and Ino Yamanaka. Sensei will be Asuma Saratobi. Ino groaned loudly, complaining why Kami seemed to hate her. Choji just smiled while Shikamaru was Asleep. Naruto raised his eyebrow in confusion, his eyes scanning the classroom as he started to count the students. 25, 26, 27. What the hell, I'm the 28th graduate, he thought to himself with a frown. The class was uneven, and every kid has now been put into a squad except him. He was the only one left. Sasuke seemed to notice as well, and looked at Naruto with the same amount of confusion. Iruka continued, his eyes looking down at his file in shock. Well, this is new. Team 11 will consist of Naruto, Namikaze, Sai, and Shizuka. Sensei will be Anko Mitarashi. The class went silent. No one even knew who those last two kids are. Iruka saw his students' confusion and was right there with them. He read off the file. Sai was trained under Umbu tutelage with the village elder Danzo's supervision. Shizuka is a transfer student from Nadeshiko village. She moved here last week, so I hope you'll make them both feel welcomed. After a few moments of letting it all sink in, Iruka explained where they would meet their instructors. Team 7, Kakashi will be up on the roof. Team 8, Kurenai will be at Training Ground 21. Team 10, Asuma will be at Training Ground 99. Team 11, Anko will be at Training Ground 4. Time skip. After class. Naruto stayed silent as he made his way to Training Ground 4. It was the closest training ground to the academy, and the walk was only about 10 minutes. On his way, his thoughts drifted to his supposed two teammates. The other male on his team was a boy named Sai, no surname. He was trained by a man named Danzo and was finally able to graduate. Naruto had no idea what to think of Sai. He hadn't met the boy yet, but he was a little skeptical. He was with Umbu all this time. His strength would probably be way more advanced than a regular genin. And the lone female, Shizuka, also had no surname. Now she was a total enigma. He's never heard of Nadeshiko village before, and the info he had of her was she was already a genin before transferring over. So her strength would not be something to laugh about either. So that raised the question, was he as strong as his two mystery teammates? He gave a sigh as he finally entered the training ground, suddenly feeling inferior. As he was walking up, he saw two kids almost his exact age. His brain quickly realizing who they were as he got closer to them. The boy was none other than Sai. He had long black hair, with even blacker eyes. His hair was parted in the middle, showing off his Konoha headband. He was wearing a gray shirt that ended right under his chest, allowing his pale midriff to be exposed. He had on black pants with his tan ninja pouch on the leg. He had a large scroll on his back, and he was drawing something on a lone piece of paper. His eyes moved over to the lone girl. She also had jet black hair, her bangs threatening to fall into her emerald eyes, her hair covering her headband from sight. She was wearing a tight blue shirt, with a black cape style going down to her waist, showing off her developing cleavage. She had on tight black pants, on with matching combat boots. Shizuka was the first to notice Naruto's entrance. Her green eyes sized the blonde up. He was wearing a regular black t-shirt, with a zipped-up red hoodie. He had loose shinobi pants that ended at his ankles, his green sandals matching the cloth on his headband perfectly. His unruly blonde locks falling into his eyes, only being kept up by his headband. She narrowed her eyes at Naruto. Something seemed off about the blonde, and she didn't know a lot of new graduates to already have a scar. In Shizuka, Naruto's sweat dropped. Well, she didn't sound much like a talker, so I finally looked up, his onyx eyes dead of any emotion, but a small smile formed on his lips. "Hello, I'm Sai," he said as he gave a formal bow. Naruto, feeling awkward, just smiled their way, his hand coming up to scratch the back of his head. "Well, I'm Naruto Uzumaki." That was another recent development that has occurred in the blonde's life. It's been a long time since Naruto felt like an actual Namikaze. Every time someone would associate him with that family, he would always feel like a disappointment or unwanted child. So that's why he came to call himself Uzumaki. It was a small change, but it made himself feel better. An awkward silence fell over the new genin, no one really knowing how to start a conversation. Naruto rubbed his neck as his eyes moved over his two new teammates. Shizuka noticed his lingering gaze and glared at Naruto. And what are you looking at, pretty boy? Naruto blinked in confusion before looking away from her, trying his best to hide the soft blush that now resided on his cheeks. And nothing. Just looking at my new team, Shizuka scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. Whatever. If I catch you trying to do anything sketchy, I'll make sure to kill you where you stand. Naruto scoffed at her. He wasn't one to just stand around and take threats. He had enough of those already. I haven't even done anything. Sai smiled at them both, his eyes turning into upside-down U's. You two would make a cute couple. Both their heads snapped to Sai. Shizuka, seemingly more angry, sent a kunai his way. And what's that supposed to mean, painter? I mean, it's pretty obvious what he meant. Shikaza glared over at Naruto, the blonde grinning mischievously. I didn't ask you, Baka. Sai never lost his smile. He set the paper he was drawing on back to the floor. Blondie, try not to get too angry. She has a temper. Shizuka's face heated up as she threw her arms over her chest. Naruto let a snicker leave his mouth. The raven-headed girl grew angrier. But before she could do anything about it, a loud, sizzling sound echoed out as a kunai embedded itself right in the center of all three genin. All three genin widened their eyes at the seal that was hanging from the back. Get back! Naruto tackled Shizuka away as Sai jumped backwards just in time. A loud explosion shook the area while Naruto fell to the ground with Shizuka on top of him. Sai landed next to them. His large scroll was now on the floor with his pen in his right hand. Both Naruto and Shizuka got to their feet and stood next to Sai. Naruto held a kunai in his hand, while Shizuka was weaponless. What the hell was that? Naruto spoke, his eyes traveling a mile a minute around the clearing. Trying to locate any sign of danger, Shizuka responded. That was most likely our sensei. It would explain why she wasn't at the training ground on time. Sai nodded his head. After a few brushstrokes, two small birds made of ink raised themselves from his scroll and took into the forest. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the ability, checking it off of ninja abilities he didn't know existed. My birds are looking around right now. No one spotted, Sai said as he stayed in his position. The remaining students circled Sai, watching the perimeter. Naruto continued for Sai. All other genin tests all revolved around teamwork. I don't imagine this being any different, he said, both his teammates nodding with him, silently thanking his late sensei for sharing that info with him. Suddenly, Sai widened his eyes. Both teammates witnessed this, and before they could speak a word, a large-sized snake came raining down at them. Its mouth opened, showing its large fangs as he attempted to devour Sai whole. Naruto suddenly appeared in front of Sai. His hands formed quick hand seals. Water style. Water shield jutsu. Naruto spun his arms rapidly as a large shield made of pure water formed from his hands. It was large enough to just cover his head as the snake bit down. The fangs connected with the water as it splashed upwards, obscuring the vision of both Naruto and the snake. Suddenly, he felt a foot jump on his back, and he looked up to see Shizuka propelling herself upwards. She spun in the air as what looked like hundreds of kunai rained down at the snake. Ninja art, kunai volley. One by one, each kunai stuck themselves into the snake's body. Pained hissing escaped the snake's mouth as it released his jaw from Naruto's water jutsu. The blonde jumped backwards, letting the jutsu break as Sai jumped to the side scroll in hand. Sadly, they didn't communicate well enough as they collided. Naruto smacked Sai in the mouth as they tumbled and rolled on the ground. Shizuka landed next to the groaning boys as she glared down at them. Naruto got to his feet, rubbing his head. Way to mess that up. Shizuka hissed as Sai smiled over at her. He got to his feet as he gave a few more strokes on the scroll. It's okay, Titsu was an accident. Stop calling me that. Ninja art, bear attack. A huge bear made of pure ink materialized out of the scroll. It easily towered over the three genin as it raced off to the snake. Another sound of a kunai soared through the air right at Naruto. The blonde, seeing it coming, reflected it with his own. Shizuka moved fast as she caught the deflected kunai at the hilt as a purple-headed girl crashed down to the clearing. She held a huge white sign in her hands, while confetti exploded from the mouths of two snakes that were around her legs. Welcome the amazing and sexy Anko Mitarashi. All three genin stared dumbfounded. This was their sensei? No one said a word while Anko just smiled happily at them. Sure, she was late. It wasn't her fault she forgot about her genin team, and then proceeded to make the sign, and convince the snakes to actually spit confetti. So not her fault. Why, you're our sensei. Shizuka gasped out as her eyes widened in pure astonishment. The sexy jounin swayed her purple hair to the side and offered her a wink. Sai looked over at Naruto and pointed his thumb over at Anko. It seems Tit-sensei deserves the name more. Naruto's spine stiffened as he gave a sideways glance over to the now enraged Shizuka and confused Anko. Shizuka smacked Sai on the head really hard, making the black-haired boy fall flat on his face. And what's supposed to mean? She quickly snapped her head to Naruto, aiming the kunai at his throat, and I swear if you anything I will lodge this kunai right in your jugular. Oh, it seems we have a hothead on this team. But if anything is getting lodged into something, I'll be doing it. Anko's voice spoke clearly, echoing in the clearing as she appeared right behind Shizuka, the feeling of cold steel on the young girl's neck as time seemed to freeze. Shizuka still had her grip on Sai, while Naruto was still looking down the barrel of a kunai. Anko's voice was sickeningly sweet, the huge smile forever glued to her face. Shizuka cringed at her sensei. Now don't be afraid of little ol' me. I won't hurt ya, she said as she slowly dragged the kunai over her neck softly. Since I can't actually kill you, laws and all, I would only torture you slowly for threatening a fellow Konoha shinobi. Just imagine the soft kunai. Her voice passed her lips smoothly, making Shizuka sick to her stomach. Anko pushed the kunai deeper into her skin, drawing a small amount of blood, pressing a little deeper dash. Suddenly Shizuka's body erupted into gold confetti. Anko looked on in shock as she jumped backwards, letting the confetti hit the ground. She looked behind her as she saw the huge snake she sent after the genin was now dead. That bear had ripped it to shreds, while Naruto and the remaining of his team were standing next to the ink bear. Shizuka looked over at Naruto in shock, while Sai remained impassive. Naruto grinned at his sensei's expression as a sudden hand grabbed the back of Anko's body, pressing a kunai to her throat. The purple-haired Kunoichi's eyes glanced at her side to see an exact copy of Naruto behind her. Genja, pretty effective, isn't it? Anko returned the grin. When did you cast it? Naruto explained, the moment you put the kunai to Shizuka's throat. Okay, that was partly the truth. While Anko was distracted on Shizuka, and while Sai was facing the ground, he had time to hide his face and activate his Sharingan. He was able to catch Anko's eyes for a split second before she was put under one of his genjutsu. It was a risky move on Naruto's part. His teammates didn't see him weave any hand seals, if they even saw anything to begin with. But he did enjoy the look of pure disbelief on Shizuka's face as he walked over to her and just pushed Anko's arms away. While Sai looked shocked for a moment, Naruto really couldn't tell since it went away as soon as it saw it. Anko let out loud booming laughter as she grinned at the blonde behind her, her eyes glowing with playfulness. Having fun pressing yourself into my blondie? The clone of Naruto turned a new shade of red as Anko teased him. Before he could move, Anko quickly dispelled the clone, as it erupted into water, soaking the back of her brown trench coat. She took a few steps closer to the new genin and smirked, her tongue coming out to lick her lips hungrily. I will say you three surprised me greatly. Not only were you able to kill that snake, she said, pointing her thumb over at the dead snake, you managed to surprise a Jounin-level ninja, and you did it with amazing teamwork with only knowing each other for not even an hour. I'll say that's worthy of passing. Naruto physically beamed at the praise, trying his best to rid the giant blush on his face. Shizuka was a lot more composed since she was already a genin from her hometown, but she couldn't stop the small grin from forming. Sai remained impassive. His eyes stayed blank, but a faintest smile was noticeable. It was subtle but still there. Now we are officially Team 11. Now get ready for fucking hell. Okay, please report everyone, Minato said happily as he clapped his hands in joy. Out of all jobs that Minato absolutely hated while he was Hokage, He was always excited for the graduation of academy students. Every year he looks forward to it, and this year was no exception. Looking out in front of him were 9 of the strongest jounin that Konoha had to offer, and the test results that Irika had given him told him that there was a very promising bunch of kids this year. He couldn't contain his excitement and decided to give the kids jounin senseis the day of. He smiled wide as he gestured to his only student in the room. "Kakashi-kun, please report." Kakashi sweat dropped at the Hokage's attitude. Putting down his infamous Ichi Paradise book, he scratched his cheek with a sigh. Team 7, consisting of Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, and Ken Gasai, pass. The whole room was in shock at hearing him actually pass a squad. Even Minato was slightly at a loss for words. "Really? What made you pass them and not any other of your teams?" A man named Asuma Saratobi said, taking a long drag of his cigarette, making the woman next to him elbow him slightly in the ribs. Minato nodded. "I would also love to hear this, Kakashi-kun." The silver-haired man shrugged his shoulders. "Well, at first they were just like every other team I had gotten before, attacking me all separately and with no plan. The Haruno girl wouldn't stop, following the Uchiha kid around like a lost puppy dog. It was really hard to watch." "That doesn't explain why you passed them, Kakashi." Kakashi turned his head and gave his signature eye smile to Kurenai Yuhi, waving his hand in the air. "I'm getting there, Kurenai." It wasn't until the last 10 minutes of the test that they coordinated an attack against me all at once. Of course, they didn't push me very hard at all, but it was a valiant effort. But finally showing signs of teamwork, I decided to pass them. Minato smiled at his explanation, happy to hear that Kakashi finally passes one of his teams. His eyes shifted over to the person next in line. "Kurenai-san, please report." She nodded, looking back up to her Hokage, meeting his eyes, and she swallowed a grunt. Team 8, consisting of Kiba Inuzuka, Shino Aburame, and Hinata Hyuga, have passed Hokage-sama, she said, making him nod his head. They all worked well together from the moment the test started. It was a good improvement to Hinata-chan as well. Kiba-kun seemed to help her break out of her shell a bit. "That's wonderful. I was worried that her shyness would interfere with her abilities," he said, genuinely happy to hear about the girl's improvement. Kurenai nodded before stepping back into place. "Okay, Asuma Saratobi, how was Team 10? The big burly man smiled, as you would expect Hokage-sama. Shikamaru Nara, Ino Yamanaka, and Choji Akimic performed perfectly. Minato grinned as expected from the next generation of the Ino Shikecho trio. Last but not least, Minato turned his attention to the last shinobi in the lineup. He felt his enthusiasm start to die down a little as he dreaded what was coming next. "Enko Mitarashi, report on Team 11, please." Enko snapped to attention at being addressed so suddenly. She was slightly embarrassed, since she was too preoccupied looking at all the pictures that hung on the walls of the Hokage's office. She never knew all the past Hokages were hanging on the wall. She grinned happily as she saluted her leader playfully. Team 11, consisting of Shizuka, Sai, and Naruto Namikaze, passed with flying colors Hokage-sama, she said, not noticing the sigh of relief that Minato breathed out. He was nervous to hear that his youngest wouldn't have graduated, but if he did, would it really be his fault? Mianto shook his thoughts away. "I see. That's wonderful then," he said, making Enko nod. "Yes, Hokama. They all worked surprisingly well together despite only knowing each other for only about 10 minuets prior to the test," she said, shocking Minato. She continued, "They managed to kill one of my snake summons in Naruto, and Shizuka were pretty proficient with their ninjutsu, and that Sai kid was a front runner for ninjutsu. But Naruto, man, did he surprise me," she said, getting everyone present to look at her in question. Minato felt his hands clam up, afraid to ask. "How so, Enko?" Asuma asked. He was pretty intrigued himself. He had somehow forgotten that Hokage-sama had a third child. Enko turned towards Sarutobi. "Well, I was threatening the Shizuka girl. You know, kunai to the neck trying to scare her." Everyone pleasantly rolled their eyes. Typical Enko. When she just exploded into a ball of confetti. And before I even noticed that blonde Gaki caught me in a genjutsu with a kunai to my neck, the room fell silent, shocked to hear the report on the third Namikaze's child. Kurenai was probably the least shocked at hearing that the blonde boy she hadn't seen in a very long time was on Enko's team. She smiled to herself, happy to hear that he was still pursuing genjutsu. Her mind started to drift thinking about him. She hasn't seen the kid since her promotion to Jounin almost 5 years ago. Or really Enko? How'd he manage to do that? Asuma set his cigarette, having already fallen out of his mouth in shock. Even the usual stoic Kakashi couldn't help but show a hint of surprise. Enko shrugged. I'm still not really sure when he did it, but it had to be quick. He never weaved a single sign. And as far as I know, you can't perform a genjutsu without hand signs. Kurenai shook her head. That's not true. You can, but it takes an incredible amount of stability and chakra control. Only masters of the art are able to do it. Enko nodded, grinning. Then I might have a genjutsu prodigy on my team, Sweet. He wasn't a one-trick pony either. He had a pretty strong water affinity, she said, turning her attention back to Minato, raising an eyebrow in curiosity. Any reason on why he didn't graduate early with his brother and sister Hokage-sama? He definitely is higher than genin level, she asked, making all eyes turn to Minato. His head started to ache as he panicked at all the expected shinobi eyes on him. He coughed into his fist. Anyway, thank you, Anko-san. Everyone is dismissed. I have some important things I need to look over, he frantically said as one by one the Jounin started to leave his office. Unbeknownst to him were the narrowed eyes, looking his way as they left the room. Minato put his head in his hands, sweat starting to form on his brow as he looked down at his desk. I don't know what to do. 3 weeks later. The mission is simple. We get in there, retrieve the folder, and get away as fast as possible. Leave no evidence behind. A soft, powerful feminine voice rang through the forest clearing, bouncing off the decaying oak trees, letting it linger in the summer air. The tone of voice was dark, the holder being horribly serious as her feminine hand rested on one of the trees. Her fingernails tried to pierce the dying bark as her blue eyes wandered around the forest. The voice belonged to the one and only Narumi Namikaze, her father. The Hokage put her in charge of a simple retrieval mission just outside the border of Konoha. While this isn't her first retrieval mission, it didn't stop her from being overly serious. She quickly scanned over the area, her eyes coming to rest on an old-looking cabin that was just outside of Tazuna town, letting the soft breeze flow over her body, allowing the air to slightly calm her. 3 guards on each side of the building. She whispered to herself as her eyes shifted to a cluster of trees just past the cabin. Hiding in the trees are another set of 3. Their chakra signatures are much larger. High tuning if I had to estimate. Her bangs fell forward slightly, obscuring her vision and shadowing her eyes. Mission start. Konoha. Sai, I'll fucking kill you. Shizuka yelled, and as what seemed like the 100th kunai left her palms as it soared through the air, all aimed over to the black-haired teammate of Team 11. Sai wasn't a prideful man. Hell, he didn't have that many emotions since he was taken into the Umbu at such a young age. And he knows that for as long as he lives, he will never admit that he was scared at this very moment. Really fucking scared. Shizuka tossed another kunai, this one barely nicking Sai across the cheek. Naruto watched from the sidelines in pity. While he did find the affectionate nickname tits for Shizuka to be quite funny, he knew it was going to bite the boy in the ass someday. He didn't expect it to be barely 3 weeks after becoming an official team. So here he was now witnessing a murder attempt while he periodically had to sidestep from a kunai that Shizuka missed Sai with. Their team training with Anko had ended a while ago. She quickly left the training ground, and all 3 genin decided to stay to get a little extra training in. The only rule she gave was to make sure they were well rested for tomorrow. Apparently they were getting a new mission. And just 2 hours went by before all hell broke loose between Team 11. Shizuka knocked it off. At least give him some breathing room. The raven-headed genin snapped her head over to Naruto and gave one of her meanest glares, her grip tightening around her kunai as her emerald eyes locked within Naruto's own sapphire. Shizuka scoffed as she put her kunai away, letting Sai walk off free, her eyes never leaving Naruto's. After seeing Sai walk off, he let a small smile grace his lips. Sai was very, very sweaty, but other than a few cuts here and there, he looked perfectly fine. He turned to Sai. "You okay?" Sai gave a hesitant nod of gratitude to the blonde as he smiled. "Yes, it was a good workout. Please, all you did was run around for an hour. Cardio is important." Naruto sighed as he watched the two start to bicker once again. Well, more like Sai just led Shizuka on until she got fed up and brought her weapons out, his eyes going back and forth between the two. Even though he was starting to get fed up with the constant bickering, it did bring a smile to his face, feeling like he was a part of a group, as he would be the one to step in, and sometimes be on the receiving end with Shizuka. Naruto thought about that. Sure, they were a team, but they didn't really do anything as a team outside of this training ground and missions. Naruto got both their attention before speaking. "Why don't we all go get something to eat? You know, as a team?" Both Sai and Shizuka looked at Naruto in sudden surprise. Naruto's sweat dropped. He didn't think it was such a strange thing to ask. They were a team after all. Naruto chuckled nervously at their blank expressions. "We could go to that ramen shop Ichiruka. It's pretty good." After a few more moments of tense silence, Shizuka nodded. "Yes, sure. Lead the way. 3 miso ramen for me, please. 1 seafood ramen, please. I'll have what Tita the lady is having." Naruto snickered as Sai quickly shut his insult down by the dark glare Shizuka sent his way. After giving the chef their orders, an awkward silence fell over them, neither really knowing what to say or even how to talk to each other. So Naruto started effectively grabbing the attention of the two genin. "Why don't we finally get to know one another? Like what we like and dislike." He finished with a smile. He noticed their hesitant looks and gave an awkward laugh. "Okay, how about I go first then? My name is Uzumaki Naruto. My likes are training, being with my friends Turtles and Shursenizan. I dislike people who abandon anyone, rapists, the usual. And my dream is to prove everyone wrong about me and make my sensei proud," he said, his voice turning deathly serious, surprising his two teammates. In the last few weeks, they haven't seen Naruto seriously at any moment. Sure, they have only done training exercises and a lot of D-rank missions. But this was something entirely different. It seemed like he was much older, way too old for a 13-year-old. Sai was the first to recover, but he felt something trigger within him. His eyes flashed with a foreign emotion that he hasn't felt in years. "My name is Sai. I like to paint. I dislike the same things you do. My dream. I guess I don't have one." "What? You don't have a dream?" All seriousness, that Naruto previously evaporated in seconds. His hand slammed on the table, making his ramen broth leak out of his bowl as he caught the attention of other occupants within the stand. Naruto didn't waver. "Is there nothing you ever wanted to do? Or to be?" Naruto asked incredulously. Sai once again felt the unfamiliar, feeling trigger inside him once again. He sat there in stunned silence. Anything he thought he should say died in his throat, his mind going too fast to comprehend an appropriate response. So he said the first thing that meant something to him. "My dream is to finish my brother's book." Naruto smiled wide. His eyes turned into upside-down U's. He praised Sai for having a meaningful dream, then looked over at Shizuka. The transfer shinobi gave a deep sigh, not really liking the idea of sharing her personal interests. She never did something like this in her home village. "My name is Shizuka. I like training, animals, and making dolls." She blushed bright red as she noticed both her teammates raise their eyebrows in shock and confusion. Mainly Naruto. "I dislike the same things you guys do, plus some. And my dream is to become the world's strongest kunoichi." Naruto smiled wide over at Shizuka. "That's great. See, I told you guys this was going to be fun," he said with a grin, finally feeling comfortable after a solid conversation. Shizuka crossed her arms around her chest. Her ears turned a tad pink as she told her teammates her secrets. She couldn't deny that it was quite interesting to hear what her teammates actually thought and felt. She looked over at Sai to see his face was more blank than usual, his ramen bowl untouched. After a few moments, he looked her way, his face morphing into a large smile doing so. The look is completely gone. She broke out of her musing once Naruto began speaking again. Actually, Shizuka, I've been wanting to ask you, what is Nadeshiko like? Naruto asked, bringing up his chopstick to his chin in thought. I've never heard of the village before. How is it over there? Shizuka turned her attention to Naruto, tilting her head at the question. She hummed in thought for a moment before answering him. It wasn't very good in Nadeshiko when I was there. There's a stupid rule where once we graduate the academy, we have to leave the village and search for a strong male shinobi. And if we lose in battle, they must come to our village, and we get married off to them. She finished with a scowl. Naruto looked at her shocked. What? That's ridiculous. Shizuka nodded her head in agreement. I agree. We are just used to creating stronger heirs for our village. Basically livestock. Once we get married off, we are forced to retire as shinobi and become full-time wives. Naruto clenched his fists at her explanation, shaking his head. That's so ridiculous. That village is forcing you guys into a life no one wants, he said, and Shizuka nodded sadly. Yes, but that is why I came to Konoha, she said, looking down, a frown on her face. My parents died when I was very young, but they were both originally born in Konoha. While Nadeshiko is technically closer to Kiri, I could have gone there. I wanted to experience the village my parents were raised in, she said. Naruto gave her a sympathetic look. Surprisingly, Sai spoke up, trying his best to give the girl a reassuring pat on the shoulder. It was awkward and strained, but she appreciated it nonetheless. I know what you mean, Shizuka-san. I never knew who my real parents were. I was born in a random little village a few miles from Konoha, but I always heard that they were from the big village that was Konoha. I guess you could say my first real dream is seeing the place they grew up in, he said, allowing them to see just a fraction of his emotions. Naruto nodded as they continued to eat their food in a comfortable silence. After they finished their meal, they walked outside back into the streets of Konoha. Naruto breathed in the fresh air as he stretched his body. Shizuki came next to him. Thanks for inviting us out to eat with you, Naruto. I actually had a good time. She smiled, and Sai nodded next to her. Indeed. Maybe we could do that again sometime. Naruto's eyes lit up in glee as he nodded happily. Of course I would be happy to. We are a team after all, dash. Well, if it isn't my little old Toto. Naruto felt himself tense up. Shizuka and Sai both noticed Naruto's body tense up. They turned their heads over to the front of the stand to see the fabled Natsu Namikaze leaning just outside of the stand. A smirk plastered on his face, his Chunin vest glowing, as he had an open red coat over it. His village headband wrapped around his neck, hanging loosely, as he crossed his arms around his chest. He held his head up high. His smirk, if possible, seemed to stretch further across his face. His eyes switched over to the rest of the team slowly. You both will have to excuse my little brother here. He gets a bit overzealous most of the time. Naruto clenched his fists as he looked at his brother. His whole family always finds a way to ruin a good day. When he's with friends, his team, or alone time, they always find a way to make his life more and more miserable. He had no words for his brother, wanting his very presence gone from the shop. Shizuka, on the other hand, was showing signs of pure bewilderment. She snapped her head over to Naruto. Wait, be brother. Natsu chuckled as he reached over and threw his arm around Shizuka. The black-haired girl blushed from the sudden pide, but couldn't look away from his hypnotizing amethyst eyes staring back at her, mere inches away from her face. Oh, he didn't tell you? I knew it was always hard to be kept under our shadows after all, so I can't blame him. What are you doing here, Natsu? Naruto growled between his teeth, the mere presence of his brother bothering him. Natsu was the one family member he saw the least. He was usually always on missions or training with their mother or father. Natsu grunted as he removed himself from the black-headed girl and grabbed a bag of ramen that was sitting on the counter. Tusen asked me to pick up some ramen for the trip. This time Naruto looked back to see his brother, his eyes frowning in confusion. Natsu smirked again. Oh yes, did I forget to mention? Tusen and Kasen are taking me to Mount Mayaboku to practice my sage training a year early. Naruto felt his blood run cold. His eyes went wide as Natsu held his head up. Satisfied with the reaction he got from Naruto, he turned to leave the stand. It was great seeing you and your team Toto. With one last glance back, his purple eyes darkened considerably. Try to keep up. A tense silence shifted through the air as soon as Natsu left. Naruto's eyes were downcast, his hair falling past his forehead as his teammates stood there awkwardly. Shizuka reacted first as she patted Naruto on the shoulder. Hey, I don't really know what just happened, but dash. It's fine, Shizuka, Naruto said, interrupting her as he patted her own hand down with his before sliding hers off. I'm used to it, he said, forcing a smile. Unluckily for him, Shizuka shook her head adamantly at him. No can do, Baka. We shared about our family, now it's your turn. So spill. Naruto frowned, sending a slightly pleading look towards the emerald-eyed girl. Can I tell you another time? It's a very long story. Before Shizuka could respond, Sai interjected himself. Yes, maybe next time we go out for lunch, he said. He could tell the blonde wasn't in a good enough mood to talk. Naruto gave Sai an appreciative nod before averting his eyes back to Shizuka. She looked like she was about to protest, but ultimately she gave in. Letting out an irritated sigh, she pointed at the blonde. Fine, but you will tell us. I promise I will, he said before excusing himself and walking away from the ramen stand, leaving his two teammates behind. Shizuka scowled as she turned over to Sai in confusion. Why did you let it go so easily? It seemed to really bother him. And that was Natsu Namikaze. Sai shook his head at her, watching his blonde teammate walk off. Yes, it was. But whatever happened here, it seemed to have affected Blondie Kuin deeply. He was in no mood to communicate his feelings. I'm sure you could tell. Shizuka frowned at his answer, turning her head as she followed the back of the blonde. She gave a hesitant nod. Yeah, I could tell. I wonder what happened between them. Sai shrugged. In my time training with the Umbu, I knew that Naruto was related to the Namikazes. But I didn't know they held so much disdain for one another. But the feeling I got from Natsu-san, it wasn't pleasant. Shizuka nodded, agreeing with him. Let's leave Blondie Kuin alone for now, Tich-chan. He'll tell us when he's ready. Shizuka couldn't even find it in herself to yell at Sai this time. Can you at least give me a better nickname? I will dwell on the possibility. Okay, spill it, Missy. How did it go? Enko pestered at Kurenai as they walked through the streets of Konoha. Kurenai sighed, rubbing her temples in irritation. I already told you. He just took me to a coffee shop. We talked for about 2 hours, and then we parted ways, she said with Enko frowning at her, jumping in front of Kurenai and walking backwards with her hands behind her head, ignoring the passers-by who looked at her in annoyance. Did you guys kiss at all? Maybe even second base? The purple-haired Kunoichi said, wiggled her eyebrows at Kurenai. Enko. Kurenai quietly yelled at her friend, a small blush forming on her cheeks. Enko snickered at her friend before turning back around. I know, I'm just teasing you, she said before finally coming into view of her favorite dango shop. Her mouth started to water as her eyes started to glisten. She quickly pulled Kurenai inside, grabbing a table by the open window. Kurenai glared at her. Couldn't you have just asked me to hurry it up and not drag me? Enko nodded her head. I could, but why would I? Kurenai sighed in irritation before breaking out into a small smile, clearly amused by her friend's antics. It was one of the reasons why she loved spending time with Enko. She was always honest, maybe a little too honest, but it added to her charm in Kurenai's opinion. After pushing past her rough exterior, you were met with one of the most selfless human beings you would ever meet. Kurenai knew how high Enko valued her friendships. They were the most important thing to her, and she would always have your back no matter what, something Kurenai loved her for. As they ordered their food, Kurenai straightened her posture, letting the comforting breeze calm her down. She was silently happy that Enko had picked out a table next to the window. So, nothing happened with Asuma, huh? Kurenai sighed as she shrugged her shoulders at her friend, closing her eyes, letting them have a short-lived rest. No, just a regular trip to the coffee shop, she said irritably. Her and Asuma had been flirting back and forth for several months, and the man refused to officially ask her out. She was beginning to think he wasn't interested in her anymore. Enko threw her arm over the chair next to her, using a sunbon needle to pick at her teeth. Well, can't say I'm surprised. He may act tough, but he's a total pussy, she said, spitting out the piece of food she finally removed from her gums. Do you still even like him at this point? Kurenai had to take a moment to think about it. He was a very sweet man, but he never acted on any of his decisions. So yes, she liked him. He was one of the only men in Konoha who she would consider boyfriend material. But over the past few months, she didn't know if she just liked him as a friend. So Kurenai hesitantly shook her head. I don't know. He's very sweet and treats me like an equal, but he's been more off-putting lately than usual. He doesn't really talk either, and that damn smoking... Enko nodded at her in understanding. Just another bust in Konoha no Sato. If you wanna, I can set up a blind date for you. Kurenai felt all the blood drain away from her face. The last time Enko set up a date for her, let's just say it ended with a lot of screaming, a lot of vomit, and a passed-out sushi chef. Coughing into her fist, she quickly changed subjects. Anyway, how's your genin team? Kurenai asked, regaining her composure. Enko grinned her way. Kurenai was shocked to see a look of pride gleam over her eyes. Kurenai has been curious about Team 11 since the meeting they all had in the Hokage's office 3 weeks ago, mainly because she was curious about how Naruto was doing. A sullen look glazed her eyes as she recalled how fidgety the Yondaime was at the mention of Naruto during the meeting. I guess things are still dicey with them. I hope he's doing okay. Honestly, I really didn't want to take a genin squad at all, but I'm glad I did Kuchan. Those kids are pretty good for being just genin. Their teamwork is still a little rough around the edges, but other than that I have no complaints, she said, grinning. Kurenai nodded. How is Naruto? Enko raised an eyebrow in confusion at the odd question, turning her attention to Kurenai tilting her head. Kurenai schooled her emotions as she felt a bead of sweat form on her brow. Only Enko could ever make her uncomfortable by just a simple stare. Enko was about to answer the odd question before her eyes caught a glimpse of a familiar mop of blonde hair walking past the stand. Her face broke out into a devious smirk. Why don't you ask him yourself? Standing up abruptly, she pushed past Kurenai, leaning her head out the window. Enko, what are you dash? Hey, Naruto-kun, over here. Naruto jumped in surprise in the street as he snapped his head around, looking for where the scream came from. The blonde looked to his left to see his sensei practically falling out of a window, waving her hands in his direction. Looking past her, he was able to catch a glimpse of very familiar crimson-red eyes that left such a powerful impression on him years ago. He felt his cheeks start to heat up as he looked at the lady next to his sensei. She was wearing a tight bandage-looking battle dress with bandages wrapped around her arm, stopping just before her forearm. Kekune-sen? He thought as his mind started to go blank the longer he stared in her direction. His sensei completely forgotten. She was breathtaking. He had never seen someone so beautiful before. While he knew she was beautiful when he saw her 5 years ago, but he didn't really think much of it back then. After all, he was only a child. Enko watched as he froze in the street. You gonna stand there all damn day? Hurry in here, she yelled, breaking Naruto out of his trance as he rushed into the dango shop. Looking at Enko, sorry, Enko-sensei, he said, bringing his hand up to scratch the back of his head. Kurenai looked at the boy as he and Enko started to talk. She looked him up and down. Wow. He really grew up. He almost looks like a completely different person, she thought as she smiled at seeing him scratch his head, a habit he seemed to have kept all these years. Moving her eyes up his body, she couldn't help but notice the large scar over his left eye. She swallowed back a gasp as she traced it with her eyes. Something sparked within her. She wanted to reach out and wipe away the imaginary tears on his face, like she had done all those years ago. Anyway, Gaki, Kuchan here was actually just asking about you, Enko said, drawing her attention, making Naruto blush a bit. Naruto turned towards Kurenai as she nodded. Yes, I wanted to see how you were doing. It's been a long time after all, she said, offering a smile, making him return it with ease. Enko tilted her head, more confused now than she was before. She didn't know that Kurenai knew Naruto. Deciding to be a good friend for once, she stood up from her seat. Well, it seems you two kids have some catching up to do, so I'll leave you to it, she said as Kurenai looked at Enko sadly. She did feel bad. She and Enko hadn't hung out in a long time, and she knew her purple-headed friend was looking forward to it. Enko swatted her hand, as Enko gave her a grin. Don't worry about lil' old me Kuchan. We can meet up later. I'm gonna go piss off Kakashi, she said before winking and leaving the stand. Kurenai sighed as she watched her friend walk out, promising to make it up to her. Naruto laughed awkwardly, standing near the table. Sorry about that, Kurenai-san. I didn't mean to interrupt anything. She offered a small smile before motonoing the blonde to sit across from her. Don't apologize. We are the ones who called you over after all. Naruto nodded before taking his seat at the table. They began to catch up on what's new with them in the past 5 years, from Naruto becoming a genin and Kurenai passing her jounin exams. Minutes soon turned to hours as they stayed in the food stand, enjoying the pleasant company. They got on the topic of genjutsu, and she was excited to hear that he kept up his rigorous training and was slowly getting better and better each day. She told him how Enko bragged about him in the meeting with the Hokage, that he managed to catch her in hand seal-less genjutsu. Naruto blushed at the praise, making Kurenai giggle slightly, finding his blush to be incredibly cute. Getting lost in mindless chatter, they were soon kicked out of the stand, staying well past closing time. Naruto offered to walk her home, and she agreed, touched by his kind gesture. On the way to her apartment, she couldn't help but sneak a peek back at the boy. She was pleasantly surprised by how much she enjoyed her night tonight. While she only thought they were going to just talk for almost an hour, they ended up spending more than half of the evening at the shop. So long, in fact, that they decided to even have dinner there. He was all in all a perfect gentleman, even though this wasn't a date. She had wished that the last date she had went as good as this. Asuma had never walked her home before, but her mind quickly switched topics. Say, Naruto-kun, can I ask you something? Naruto nodded his head at her. Kurenai went silent for a moment, trying her best to figure out what words she wanted to say exactly. How is everything going, with your family? She said softly, making Naruto look down to the floor. Kurenai, after a moment, turned her head to see that Naruto had stopped walking and was frozen in place. Kurenai was about to apologize, but Naruto spoke up before she could. Clenching his fist tightly, he looked at the ground. Biting his lip, everything is all right, Kurenai-san. Same old, same old. Kurenai felt her eyes soften before grabbing his arm. Naruto looked up at her in confusion as she guided him to a small bench. Take a seat, Naruto-kun, she said, making Naruto glance in confusion, but I was just supposed to walk you home. Kurenai nodded before pointing to her right. My apartment is right around the corner, but now I just want to talk. He nodded his head and took the seat directly next to her, putting his hands together as he sat awkwardly next to Kurenai. It was tense on the bench, neither knowing really how to spark up such a serious topic. It was dark outside. Their only source of light was the street lamp that resided next to the bench. Kurenai took several deep breaths before shifting her body to the blonde boy. Do you want to talk about it? Naruto stayed silent as he tightened his hands together. He didn't want to burden Kurenai with his life. He felt bad already delaying their trip because of his problems. But he knew the longer he let this sit and marinate in his mind, it would soon explode on him. Shutting his eyes, his scar pulsing with phantom pain as his stomach sent flips internally within him. It's just, he started out, Kurenai giving him her full attention. Once Yasue-san died, I was really hoping things would get better. I was praying. I really needed someone there for me. I made friends at the academy, but no one could ever replace Yasue Nizan, he said, his voice cracking several times during his speech. his body hunching over as he let out a quiet sob. Everything just got worse. Natsu and Narumi managed to graduate early, leaving me behind. My parents pulled even further away, if that was even possible, and I lost support from the only person who was there for me. No one wants me. Everyone always leaves me, I guess. I'm just not special enough, he said as more and more sobs escaped his throat. Kurenai looked at Naruto with a heavy heart, her own heart breaking at the very sight of him. She watched as the dam holding back his true feelings started to crack, letting his emotions leak out. Kurenai softly removed his hands from their grip and intertwined their hands together. Naruto can look at me. Naruto remained still as he tried to calm down his erratic breathing. He didn't want to look at her. He already felt bad enough putting her through this. She probably hated him for it. She probably wanted to chastise him for being such a baby, for crying about all the bad things going on in his life. Please? Her voice was soft. It felt like silk as it left her soft lips and floated themselves over Naruto's skin. Naruto felt his pulse quicken as he slowly lifted his eyes, expecting to see disappointment and anger. It surprised him greatly when her crimson eyes held nothing but warmth. It was almost intoxicating to look at. He felt his cheeks start to heat up from her stare. His eyes couldn't help but drift down to her soft red lace lips. She released one of her hands, bringing it up to Naruto's left eye, slowly wiping away his remaining tears as she looked at his beautiful blue eyes, her thumb slowly caressing the bottom of his scar tenderly. Don't say things like that, Naruto-kun. Your family is just full of idiots. You are one of the most special, strongest people I have ever met, and you could use this time to be you, the you that you want to be, she said, offering the boy a smile filled with so much warmth. Hell, if I had to go through what you did, I wouldn't have even made it a day, she chuckled to herself. Naruto sat there quietly, letting her words echo through his mind. His stomach started to calm down a bit as he leaned slightly into her touch. And just remember, Naruto-kun, you have a duty to prove them wrong, right? Naruto widened his eyes a bit as he turned his gaze back onto Kurenai. The corner of his lips started to lift upwards as he nodded to Kurenai, his eyes shining with newfound determination. Yeah, that's right. Okay, my cute genin. This mission is very easy, so I better not hear any complaining. We are to deliver this letter. The purple-headed jounin of Team 11 raises her arm to show the neatly packaged letter in her hand to the mayor of Tazuna Town. Her name is Maikisu and the town is only about a few hours away. And this is our first seed tank mission, Enko explained loudly, throwing her arms up in the air in emphasis, hoping to see her slaves a genin yell in excitement with her. She pouted when she saw that all three were wearing the exact same look of melancholic/thoughtful expressions on their faces. Shizuka was the only one who showed any real excitement about the mission as she broke out into a small grin. Coughing into her fist, she frowned. You guys are boring, she said with a pout, making all three genin sweat drop. Without waiting for a response, Anko took the lead in front, Sai and Shizuka flaking her sides with Naruto watching the back. A comfortable silence fell over the team as Naruto was lost in his own thoughts. His mind wandered back to last night's events. Talking with Kurenai, he couldn't help but smile as he recalled her words. She was right. He needed to push past this and show them exactly what they were missing. He was thankful he talked with her. She even agreed to train him in Genjutsu once he returned from his mission. He was ecstatic to hear that and was already looking forward to coming back. He took this time to look around the forest as him and his team ventured further in. It was his first time out of the village. It felt kind of surreal to finally escape the walls of Konoha. It was almost freeing in a way. Enko's voice broke him out of his trance. Okay, team, we are about 4 hours away from Tazuna Town. We're going to make a small campfire and get there first thing tomorrow morning, Enko explained, then went ahead and gave everyone little duties in order to set up camp. Sai was in charge of getting firewood. Shizuka was to put together the tents, and Naruto to distribute the food. Naruto finished his task fairly quickly and sat on one of the wooden tree stumps, idly waiting for his team to finish their respective tasks. His eyes scanning over his team. He would make sure to apologize to them later on for rudely brushing them off yesterday. "Hey kid, how was your date with Kurenai-chan last night?" Enko said, effectively getting the attention of all three genin as she looked down at Naruto, arms crossed over her chest as she grinned. Naruto blushed deeply, his face resembling that of a ripe tomato. "A D-date?" Shizuka muttered, looking up at Naruto in shock, the tent falling out of her hand. Naruto waved his hands in defense, rapidly shaking his head. "IW wasn't a date. We just talked, that was all." Enko tried to fight back a laugh as she saw his face explode in embarrassment. She wished she brought her camera. She shrugged her shoulders, talking the seat next to him. "I don't know about that, Naruto-kun. You guys were out for quite a long time. Kurenai-san? Isn't she the sensei of Team 8? Sai said, his hand coming up to his chin in thought. Shizuka's eyes, if possible, grew even wider. Sai hummed as he dropped the firewood he was holding, giving a nod of approval. "I didn't think you were into older woman, Blondie-kun." "I am not. And it wasn't a date, damn it. We just happened to know each other," he said, trying his best to fight back his aggressive blush. Shizuka shook off her shock before continuing to set up the tent. Enko started to laugh before smacking Naruto in the back. The blonde yelped slightly at the impact. "Just messing with you, kid." "Slightly," she said, whispering the last part before rubbing her neck. "Actually, Blondie-kun, how do you know Kuchan?" she said, her curiosity piqued as she put a hand on her knee. This seemed to grab the others' attention, as well as they nodded in agreement. Naruto sighed to himself as he managed to get rid of his blush. Looking up, he told Shizuka and Sai to take a seat. He did promise he would tell them everything. And we are a team after all. And so he told them everything, from his family's treatment to his meeting with Shursui, and when he first met Kurenai all those years ago. As he finished his talk, he took in a deep breath, feeling somewhat good to get it all out again. Looking up, he was met with the speechless looks from his team. "And that's how you got that," Shizuka said, pointing to her own left eye as Naruto nodded, a sad smile on his face. "Yeah." Jumped in front of a kunai in fear for Shusenizan. Whoever he was fighting wasn't fazed in the slightest and sliced at my open eye. I was lucky enough that he didn't do enough damage to blind me. He lied, not willing to share his biggest secret. He brought his hand up, rubbing it slightly. Enko spoke up this time, her usually laid-back and playful attitude gone. "I can't believe it, Hokage-sama," she muttered, shaking her head in disbelief. "How did you deal with it, Naruto? With your family?" Sai said, cutting into the conversation, his expression unreadable. Naruto blinked in thought before staring deep into the bright orange flames of their campfire. After a while, he shook his head. "I haven't. I'm still trying too. But last night, I was told something very important, that I have to focus on myself, to prove them all wrong. I know that I'll never be a part of that family, which is why I dropped the Namake's name." He smiled a bittersweet smile as he rubbed the back of his head. "Doesn't it bother you?" Shizuka asked unexpectedly, her voice raised quite a bit as both male teammates and Enko were taken aback at her sudden outburst. Shizuka had the audacity to look sheepish as her cheeks turned into a light shade of pink. She gave an awkward smile as she muttered a soft apology. Naruto slowly nodded his head at her, ignoring her apology. "Well, of course it bothers me," he said, his teeth clenching, "but I try to get on their good side countless times. I try to be there as much as I could, but there's only so much I can do. So you gave up." Surprisingly, it was Sai that asked this question. Naruto looked shocked at his question as a loud silence fell over the genin. Sai never took his eyes off the blonde. Naruto digested what was said to him. He looked down into the burning fire. Sai's stare was starting to make him uncomfortable. "No, I wouldn't say I gave up. I just accepted it." Sai widened his eyes as he sat there in silence. In fact, no one else knew what to say as they sat listening to the crackling fire. Enko suddenly clapped her hands, her face morphing back into her usual playful attitude, throwing her arm around Naruto's shoulder. "Who needs him anyway? And don't act all mopey baka. Don't forget that you're part of something great here. The soon-to-be strongest team in Konoha with the hottest sensei around," she said, nudging the blonde as she pointed a thumb over to Sai and Shizuka. Naruto looked at her shocked before looking into the equally shocked eyes of his team. They all looked at each other, nodding to themselves. The atmosphere seemed to change as they exchanged glances. Now they felt like a real team. Yeah, you're right, Enko-sensei. So, let's get this party started, shall we? Who's ready for guard duty? All three genin groaned. Morning came very quickly for Team 11. After Enko gave them the rundown for guard duty, all genin took 3-hour intervals while rotating. It was highly effective and each for a good amount of sleep to feel refreshed when they woke up. It didn't take them long to pack up their remaining items and continue on the road to Tazuna Town. It was a beautiful day. The grass was shining, and there was a light breeze making the giant trees sway regally. Flowers were starting to wilt, a lot of them already losing their color and stooping down, only being kept alive by the sun rays. Shizuka and Enko made small talk as they stayed in formation, Enko in the front, Shizuka on the left, Naruto on the right, and Sai to the back. Naruto looked around the forest. The further and further they got from Konoha, the more beautiful it seemed to become. There were more wildlife running around as he watched several rabbits run around the trees and sip water from several small puddles around the area. Looking up, it was met with the scorching summer sun blazing down on them. He slightly envied Sai at this moment. Having a shirt that only covered half his stomach, Enko stopped her track as she turned back to the genin, motioning them to look behind her as she waved her hand regally. "Ladies and gentlemen, Tazuna Town," Enko said as the gates of the town finally came into view. The gates were not as large as Konoha's, but it was still impressive. Walking right through the gates, they noticed that the town was bustling with life. People were running around with shopping bags, and several stands were trying their best to get you to buy their products. Naruto looked around the town with growing excitement. It was a relatively small town, but the amount of life and energy was shared the moment they walked inside. Following Enko's lead, they finally stopped there, walking in front of the largest building in the whole town. Enko turned back to the kids, nodding her head. "You guys ready?" Seeing all three genin nod, she grabbed the door knob, pushing the door open. Walking inside was almost like walking through to a different dimension. The room was a dark brown color, as several pictures hung on the wall, with people Naruto didn't recognize. In the corner were several chairs with a nightstand with magazines stacked on top on one another. The air even felt more proper, more refined. "Shinobu-sen, are you here to see Kisasama?" A voice said as Naruto turned his head to see a blonde woman behind a desk, a smile plastered on her face. Enko nodded before reaching into her pouch and pulling the letter the Hokage had given her. "Yes, I need to hand-deliver this letter Hokage-sama had written personally." The blonde woman nodded before offering another one of her smiles. After a moment of looking over some papers on her desk, she pointed to the large door across from them. Yes, of course. She is right through those doors. But there is another Konoha shinobi here, so your time might be cut short just a bit." Enko raised an eyebrow at that. The girl continued, "If you'd like, I can schedule a meeting with Kisasama for tomorrow morning." Enko waved her hand. "No, that's okay. We don't need much time with her anyway." The blonde women nodded before they walked into the spacious room. Kisu was sitting behind her desk with a nervous look on her face. Her hands intertwined as she was reading a document in front of her. Standing next to the desk was an all-too-familiar person. Naruto widened his eyes as he saw the person's very own blue eyes raise in shock at his entrance. Kisu looked up from her desk and lit up as she saw the team. "Shinobu-san," she said, getting up from her seat and offering Enko a handshake. Enko snapped out of her own shock and returned the gesture. Handing the letter over to Kisu, "A pleasure, Kisu-san. We were asked to deliver this letter to you from Hokage-sama himself." Kisu nodded before turning back to the shinobi who was by her desk, her face going back to worry. "Narumi-san, do you think these shinobi will be enough?" The now identified Narumi tore her eyes away from her brother as she looked back to Kisu. She stayed silent for a few moments. "I'm not sure. I haven't worked with any of these shinobi before," she said as rising guilt erupted in her stomach as she looked back to her brother. Sadly, she knew absolutely nothing about her brother's skill as a shinobi. Anko, while never working with her personally, knew she was more than just a capable shinobi. She was trained personally by Orochimaru the Sannin before his defection. The other two on the squad she knew nothing about, not even their names. Enough for what exactly? Anko spoke up, crossing her arms over her chest, narrowing her eyes at Narumi, making the girl blink in confusion. Kisu rubbed her arm as she looked down at the ground nervously. WLUC, she said, not sure how to exactly put her thoughts into words. It seems people are targeting me in this town, bad people. She finished, making Anko raise an eyebrow. Well, like some bandits? We can take care of that easily. Narumi shook her head in response, grabbing the document on Kisu's desk and showing it to Anko. Worse, after my mission I was supposed to deliver this letter back to Kisu-san. But, she said, flipping the page over. All three genin perked up at this, as Narumi channeled chakra into the page, making words that weren't previously there before appear diagonally across. Anko leaned in, her eyes scanning over the page. Her eyes lit up in recognition. The blue flames? Anko said. Narumi nodded, placing the page back onto Kisu's desk. Yes, apparently they've been seen venturing around Tazuna Town for a while now. I suspect they will target Tazuna next. Shizuka shook her head confused. Wait, who are these blue flames? She said. She had never heard that name before in her life. The Blue Flames, AB-class group of rogue ninja that go around targeting smaller towns and villages in order to seize control of them. They specialize in fire jutsu and are remarkable at assassination techniques. They will kill anyone who gets in their way. They are pure evil. Sai spoke up as he crossed his arms. His eyes closed as he relayed the information. Narumi looked at him in mild shock before masking it. She nodded her head again. Sai hummed, but what use would they have in targeting Tazuna Town? He asked, opening his eyes looking at Kisu. The woman flinched as the boy's piercing black eyes stared back at her. She forced herself to look away. All eyes were on her now, as she played with a piece of brown hair that was framing her face. I don't know. We are a trading town. We trade our wood for goods like fish and livestock. Unless they want to take over our trades as well, she asked as she placed a hand on her chest. Calm down, Kisu-sen. Getting worked up now will only cause more problems. Narumi said as she tried to calm down the shaking mayor. What kind of wood does your town gather, Kisu-san? Anko asked as the now calmer Kisu looked up at her. Kisu tilted her head. We have an abundant supply of genus wood, so that's our main trading material. Genus wood? Naruto spoke up for the first time as he looked up shocked. His team looked back at him in confusion as Naruto began to slowly walk towards Kisu's desk. Is your desk also made out of genus wood? Kisu frowned and nodded her head. Narumi scowled at her brother, shaking her head exaggeratedly. There was a real problem here, and all he could think about was the craftsmanship of her desk. Naruto, there are more imper dash. Genus wood is very chakra conductive. With enough you can even make it harder than steel, and even so resilient where it won't even break, he said, stopping Narumi in her tracks. His eyes traced over to his, and she couldn't help but stare back. Blue eyes that looked so foreign to her. She couldn't recognize the boy as he looked at her. He was a complete and utter stranger. Slightly backing down from his gaze, she nodded her head. Naruat grabbed the edge of the desk, channeling chakra through it. The desk started to glow a soft blue color, before the light color would started to change into a deep black. Kisu gasped, throwing her hand over her mouth. That's what they're after. With enough of this wood they can make weapons, armor, and who knows what else. Naruto said, removing his hand from the desk, letting it revert back to its original light color. Kisu looked down at Naruto, her eyes wide in need. Will you guys help and take down this group? Please, I don't want anything to happen to this town. Naruto shifted awkwardly as he looked back to Anko. The purple-haired jounin seemed to be in deep thought. While she wanted to help Tazuna Town, she didn't know if her team was officially qualified for it. If they weren't here, then it would be no problem. How she and Narumi would be able to take them out. Looking back to Sai and Shizuka, they both already had battle experience. Sai was an Anbu before the team was created, and Shizuka was a genin in her previous village for about a year. But Naruto, she thought as she looked back at him. She knew he was good for a genin, better than he gave himself credit for. Yet he lacked battle experience. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw this fire of determination that was unyielding. Taking one last glance to Narumi told her all she needed to know. Anko nodded before offering Kisu a grin. Well, what can I say? Team 11 is on the case. Kisu had tears in her eyes as she bowed deeply, so the shinobi in her office, showing her gratitude, making Team 11 smile happily. Narumi coughed, grabbing everyone's attention. Kisen, do you maybe have a spare room where we could discuss the mission details? Kisa nodded enthusiastically. How about you use my office? I will go and check up on things in the village, and I'll inform Suzy at the front desk. Please take your time. Narumi nodded as Kisa quickly excused herself, leaving Narumi alone with Team 11, fighting back a frown as she noticed her brother walk up to Shizuka. Narumi pushed her thoughts into the back of her head as Enko walked up, grabbing the document again and looking it over, rubbing her chin in thought. Narumi, when did you get this? Yesterday evening. When I returned from the cabin, Kisa-san was already asleep, so I had to wait till the morning to tell her. Enko nodded her head, looking up, staring out of the lone window in the room. Sai walked up to her, peeking over her shoulder. What does the note say exactly? Pillage and take all. Are we sure this isn't just a huge ploy? Shizuka said, leaning on the wall, her eyes closed in thought. Narumi shook her head, leaning on the desk, her nails drawing circles on the wood in thought. The blue flames have never been one to back down from a threat. It seems this letter was meant for someone else entirely until I got my hands on it, she said, making Enko nod. The purple-haired woman pointed to the corner of the page. There are coordinates here. It isn't that far away from here. I went there last night. It's another small cabin. There were about 10 shinobi guarding the entrance. Whatever is in there, they don't want anyone finding it, Narumi said, taking a peek over at her brother. He was standing next to Anko with a hand in his pocket. His eyes were narrowed in thought. Naruto, how do you know about genus wood? Naruto shrugged as he looked away from her. Shushin-san taught me about a bunch of different materials that are good for weapon making, he said, ending the conversation, making Narumi frown. She instinctively clenched her fists around the desk in irritation. Her nails dragged across the wood, letting the unpleasant sound quietly echo under the desk. Anko sensed the atmosphere start to change and quickly intervened, stepping closer to Narumi, handing her the paper. The Namikaze girl grabbed hold of the page before Anko began to speak. So, what was your plan before we arrived? I was going to message Tusan and see if he could possibly send backup. No more than a team or two. While there seems to be quite a number of them, they don't seem to be very strong. The strongest seem to be about a Chunin in terms of strength. Anko nodded before looking back over to her team. She knew Sai and Shizuka could handle themselves well, but part of her wanted to back off this mission for Naruto's sake. She was confident in his abilities as a shinobi. He seemed to be improving faster than Sai and Shizuka during training. Damn kid, don't make me regret doing this, Anko thought as she looked back to Narumi, following her eyes as she glanced over to Naruto. No doubt the redhead was thinking the same thing. Anko scoffed at that. Then when the sun starts to set, we will make our move on them. We will divide up into 2 teams. Naruto and Shizuka will be with me, and Narumi and Sai will partner up. In all due respect, Anko-san, but I think I would be best paired with Naruto and Ai. Anko narrowed her eyes at the girl, crossing her arms over her chest. Naruto felt his spine stiffen as he looked over at his sister in shock. Narumi felt her resolve start to crumble as all eyes were now fixated onto her. Even her brother was giving her a suspicious look. Shizuka scowled in her direction, tightening her arms around herself. And why do you believe that, Narumi-san? Naruto-kun here has worked longer with his team than anyone else here. So I believe my assignment was for the best, she said, making Narumi physically flinch at the jounin. She lowered her head and clenched her fists, her hands starting to turn pale. "I don't mind Anko-sensei." Narumi snapped her head over in shock to Naruto, her eyes perking up as a smile started to form on her face. The rest of Team 11 looked at him in shock, however. Anko started at Naruto, her eyes shining with confusion as they locked eyes. Naruto kept his face blank as he nodded to his sensei, the both of them sharing a silent conversation. Anko, after a while, reluctantly nodded her head to the blonde, biting her lips slightly. "Fine. Shizuka and Sai with me, and Naruto and Narumi together. We will meet in the forest just outside the cabin at sunset." Several hours flew by for Team 11 and their newest member for the mission. The sun was starting to set, basking over Tazuna Town. The team all huddled together in the trees, scanning the area. Making no sound, the group moved closer until the cabin they were looking for finally came into view. Stopping in a bushel, Anko raised her hands, stopping the group. Thanks to the sunset, the forest was darker than usual, with a tiny bit of light shining through the cabin's windows. Several shinobi stalked the outside perimeter as they walked rhythmically, paced back and forth. At least a group of 10. Anko shifted her eyes to the outlining trees, trying to sense another shinobi who could have possibly been hiding. If her plan works, then they should be able to finish this mission without any difficulty. Letting herself bask in the darkness for a moment longer, she let her eyes linger back to his team. "Sai, in 5 minuets I want you to make several birds to distract the guards on the left-hand side. Once distracted, I want you, Shizuka, to kill all those distracted as we make our way to the inside. Narumi and Naruto, I trust you both to do the same on your side, understand? Do not start until you hear Shizuka make her move. I sense no other shinobi hidden anywhere, so it should go smoothly." All the kids nodded before Sai. Shizuka and Anko all disappeared from sight, Anko taking a moment longer to give Naruto a reassuring nod of her head. The forest was eerily silent as Narumi and Naruto ventured further to the right, watching the 5 guards wander around. Narumi gave Naruto a sideways glance as they crouched in silence. Naruto didn't look at her at all since the meeting in Kisa's room and was nowhere to be seen until it was time to meet for their mission. While it would have been fairly easy for her to sense his chakra, she didn't know what his chakra signature felt like. It was foreign, almost indistinguishable. Narumi was happy that he chose to work with her on this mission, and that he even agreed to her decision on being her partner on her team. But the longer she stayed with him, the more she didn't seem to know about her brother. Each passing second seemed like an eternity. She had no idea of his skill set, his speed, what he was capable of. Had he even made his first kill? Or was this his first mission outside the village? He was only a genin after all. That mere thought alone sent waves of guilt through her. "We left you behind, didn't we? How do you suppose we take out the guards?" Narumi blinked in surprise as Naruto's voice reached her ears. Naruto was looking straight ahead. His eyes narrowed in thought as he scanned the area. Narumi snapped her train of thought, letting it reverie back to the task at hand. Humming in thought, she brought her a hand to her chin. "Once Shizuka-san strikes, I can flank them from the back. Can you distract them from the front?" Narumi said as her eyes stayed locked onto Naruto. Her voice was strong, not a single trace of worry laced in her words. Naruto didn't look at her as he shook his head, his hand reaching into the pouch on his hip, taking out several kunai. Narumi scowled at her brother. Was he defying her orders? "Naruto and I, look, all you have to do is dash. There's no need." Narumi, watch. Kunai in hand, he formed 2 hand seals as he closed his eyes, taking in a deep breath. Narumi watched in silence as the sound of wings flapping averted her attention. Looking up, she noticed several white and black birds flying overhead. Narumi, who was informed of Sai's unique style of ninjutsu, wasn't surprised. Scowling at her brother again, she was about to scold him that they had to make their move. But her eyes widened as a quiet choke echoed through the forest. Turning her head back, she saw the 5 guards on their side all reach up, holding their necks. The gagging only seemed to get worse as one by one all fell to their knees, clutching their throats trying to catch their breath. Narumi's eyes widened even further as she heard her brother stand up next to her. Naruto finally breathed out before finally letting his eyes look at his sister. Diminishing air genjutsu. All the guards think they suffocated to death, he said as he walked past Narumi, leaving the dumbstruck redhead behind. Narumi watched her brothers retreating back in shock as he walked over to the down guards, his kunai ready as he bent down, placing the kunai at the guard's neck. Naruto's body seemed to freeze, his grip tightened around his kunai. Naruto looked at the body, doubt overtaking his system as he felt his hand began to shake. Narumi looked at Naruto, a frown etched on her face. He's hesitating. Suddenly Narumi felt a sudden pulse of chakra, ripping her eyes off her brother as the sensation got closer, as a large fireball came flying out of the forest. Narumi reacted quickly, throwing her shock away as she ran to Naruto. Naruto's head snapped up as he noticed the ball of fire come closer before he was tackled to the side by Narumi. The ball of fire sizzled past them as loud screams of agony echoed through the clearing as the guards on the floor exploded into flames. Before the two Namikaze had time to react, another fireball came hurtling their way. Naruto and Narumi were more prepared this time, both jumping to either side, dodging the attack. Well, I wasn't expecting you two to actually dodge the second one. I can say I'm pleasantly surprised. The kids looked up to see a tall man standing across from them, arms crossed over his chest as he grinned down at the younger shinobi. His yellow eyes glowed with amusement, letting the area around them burn. Narumi schooled her emotions as she quickly brought out a kunai of her own. Her blue eyes held no emotion as she stood tall. Naruto getting up, standing next to her. Please, it was only 2 fireballs. I've seen much worse, she said, making the older man cackle with laughter, his deep laughs echoing into the night. You got spunk, kid. It's going to be a shame killing you, he said, his voice going deadly serious, snapping his fingers as 13 shinobi jumped from the trees, all wearing crazed expressions, making the 2 Namikaze tense up. Narumi spared a nervous glance to her brother, noticing the bead of sweat sliding down his forehead. Without warning, the 13 shinobi took off racing towards Narumi, effectively separating her from Naruto. Shit, Naruto, Narumi cursed, leaping out of the way from a noticeably smaller fireball that was sent her way. Ha, come on, Missy. Why even try to fight back? I promise we'll go easy on you if you just give yourself up, one of the thugs said, an unkempt grin plastered on his face. You might as well just surrender now, sweet thing. Several of the others spoke out in agreement, as Narumi scowled in disgust as she traced over her attackers. It seems I'm going to have to make this quick. I don't want to leave my brother for too long. Who? So the bitch is confident I'll show you who's boss, the one in front yelled, his eyes flashing with anger as he sprinted off towards Narumi, sword raised high above his head. Narumi waited till the man was close and gathered wind chakra into her hand. Without hesitation, she thrust her hand into the stomach of her attacker. The man yelled out in pain as his sword slipped out of his hand, his body slumping over lifeless. The remaining guards didn't hesitate, seeing one of their own die, and all charged her at once. Narumi sighed, noticing that Naruto and that strange man were nowhere to be seen, most likely out in the forest. Narumi brought her forearm up, blocking a kick that was sent her way. The thug closest to her went in for the kill, aiming a kunai into her chest. Narumi extended her arm, gripping the attacker's wrist before his hand could make contact, bending it back, snapping his arm, and pushing it forward, forcing the kunai deep into the man's throat. That's 2. Using her momentum, she quickly twirled around, grabbing the shinobi's leg that previously kicked her, and throwing him backwards into 2 oncoming shinobi. Flying through hand seals, she took in a deep breath of air. Wind style, great breakthrough, breathing out a large gust of wind at the 3 slow shinobi as it cut them up, killing them instantly, their bodies hacked up and flying backwards. 5. Feeling a sudden chakra pulse from her left, she channeled chakra into her kunai. The bladed weapon took on a dark blue glow as it extended several inches. The man breathed in heavily, sending out another fireball. Narumi threw the wind-infused kunai at the middle of the ball of fire, making it fly directly through, hitting the man right in the heart. The fire lost its form, breaking apart in the middle and flying around the redhead, burning up another shinobi that tried to strike from her right. 7. The remaining 6 all stood several feet from her. The majority of the group were looking down at Narumi in fear, physically shaking in place, trembling as the emotionless eyes of Narumi stared back at them. "This is your last chance. Either leave here or die here." One of the shinobi gasped in fear as he dropped his sword and took off in a random direction. Soon after, 2 more followed after. 10. "Why, you monster! I'll kill you!" a man yelled, making Narumi chuckle to herself, raising a hand over her face, freaking out the remaining 3 shinobi. "You blue flames are the monsters. But I'll show you what a real monster looks like," she said, her voice dropping several octaves as they watched her eyes shift, blue irises turning into red slitted ones. Narumi gave a toothy grin, showing her extended canine teeth as she dissipated from sight, the only trace left of her being a soft breeze. "Where did you GHHH?" The man couldn't get the next words out as he looked down to see several kunai embedded in his body. Narumi looked up at the man, arms extended, gripping the remaining 2 shinobi in her grasp. Slamming their heads together, they fell to the floor, not having any time to react. The 2 shinobi suddenly heard a sizzling sound. Looking up at Narumi, both of her hands extended as blue chakra started to form in both palms of her hand. Her piercing crimson eyes rippled through them. 13. "Rasengan!" she yelled, slamming the spinning balls of chakra into the remaining 2, ignoring their screams of pain as they withered in her grasp, falling to the ground dead. Narumi retracted her hands, letting her eyes revert back to her normal cerulean. "You went a little overboard there." Narumi shrugged her shoulders, the loud voice booming in her head that she had grown accustomed to after all these years speaking to her. It was more of a message to the blue flames. "They won't target Tazuna again." The deep voice hummed in her mind, agreeing with the girl before speaking again. "You should probably check up on your brother or the rest of your team." Narumi didn't need to be told twice. Before the voice even finished speaking, she leaped away into the forest, trying to sense her brother's chakra signature. She hated this feeling, the feeling that something bad might have happened to Naruto, and it would have been her fault for not protecting him. "Please be all right, Naruto." With Naruto, after the separation, Naruto felt his hands tighten around his kunai as he stared off at the taller man, sweat beating down his brow and falling down his cheek. Watching his sister get separated from him sent a wave of anxiety through his body. His breath hitched as he saw the man start to laugh to himself, running a hand through his dark black hair. "My Mayu seemed like much easier prey than that girl." His voice was deep, making Naruto's head vibrate in worry. This was his first real encounter with an enemy shinobi, a real shinobi. It was easy for him to put the low-level guards in a genjutsu since he knew they were about his level of strength, a genin. But looking at the man in front of him now, the towering physique of muscle that stood clearly over 6 feet, it scared him. He tried to gather his erratic breathing, trying to stay composed as he racked to figure out a way to fight the shinobi. His hands started to sweat, while his legs shook in fear. The taller man reached behind his back, pulling out a large sword and aiming it at the blonde. The sword glowed in the dark as he rotated it, letting it glimmer in the darkened night. "It seems I'll have to teach you a lesson for attacking the blue flames. My name is Shin. Prepare to die." Saka moved forward several steps as he lunged towards Naruto. "Shit!" Naruto thought, bringing up his kunai, stopping the sword from ending his life. Saka grinned, applying more pressure to his blade, making Naruto grit his teeth. His arms started to tremble from the force as he broke contact, rolling to the side. Saka, feeling the blonde retreat, his blade hit the ground before kicking the blonde directly in the stomach. Naruto gasped in pain as he felt his body soar through the clearing as his back connected to a tree with a loud thud. Wincing from the sudden pain, he widened his eyes as a large blue fireball came soaring his way. Acting quick, he jumped to his feet, water style, Water Shield Jutsu. Naruto called out, waving his arm in a circular motion, as a shield made of pure water formed from his fingertips, attempting to stop the jutsu. The ball of fire made contact with his shield, and Naruto felt his knees start to buckle from the sudden force. He channeled more chakra into his shield in hopes to stop the attack head-on. Naruto widened his eyes as the fire jutsu proved to be more resilient than his. Naruto's jutsu broke, splashing his body as the explosion sent him tumbling to the ground again. Naruto sneered as he tried to grasp the grass beneath him. The water from his jutsu had burned him after exploding thanks to the fireball. Naruto hopped to his feet, glaring at the shinobi across from him in barely controlled rage, not wanting to let the pain show. He wanted to wipe that smug expression right off of Sokka's face. Sokka gave a laugh that gave the opposing blonde a cold chill. "Do you really think you have a chance to beat me, boy? You have been nothing but average, and I'm being generous," he said smoothly, his eyes glowing with disappointment. Naruto scoffed as he bit his lip to stop it from tremblingly, holding his side that the water had burned him on. "Can I really not do anything against him? I have my Sharingan, but I can't catch a glimpse of his eyes. His hair keeps falling into his face, and he's way too fast for me." He let his thoughts wander, clenching his fists as desperation gripped his very soul. Sokka was strong, stronger than he had anticipated. And for his first real fight, Sokka was the pure embodiment of a devil. While he did have some tricks up his sleeve that Shursui had left for him in the scroll, but he wasn't close to mastering it and would most likely be more of a hindrance. He didn't have the chakra control for it, or the right chakra ratio for the jutsu itself. So he did the only thing that felt right for him. "You're too cocky for your own good. Water style. Spinning top." Naruto yelled, forming water at his fingertips while spinning his body. His body became engulfed with water as he shot off towards Sokka, spinning widely. Sokka just sighed as he sidestepped, forcing his hand through the blonde's jutsu, slapping Naruto as the jutsu broke, sending Naruto to the floor once again. Naruto turned just in time to roll out of the way from a kunai. Sokka, having prepared that Naruto was able to dodge the kwani, swung his sword down into the ground, stabbing through Naruto's leg. Naruto felt his back arch up as a loud scream forced its way from his mouth. His scream echoed through the clearing, making several birds flutter away. Sokka grinned as he crossed his arms over the hilt of his sword and placed his head in the center, his voice laced with disappointment as he shook his head at Naruto. "How disappointing. I wasn't expecting much, but this was just pathetic." Naruto gasped in pain as he felt his vision start to blur, trying his best to stay awake as he saw Sokka slowly push his blade in deeper. Naruto whimpered as he smacked his head onto the floor. His body felt numb as he experienced the excruciating pain, blood leaking from his leg as Naruto peeked his eyes open to see Sokka, his malicious grin piercing through Naruto. I can't die here," Naruto thought to himself as he felt his eyelids start to flutter closed, his mind slowly losing consciousness, letting pitch darkness overtake his vision and consume his body. What would your family think? Naruto felt it again, a spark in his stomach as a mysterious voice boomed in his head. Naruto felt his body start to move on his own, gripping the sword by the blade. Sokka raised an eyebrow at the blonde, curiosity shining in his eyes as he watched Naruto grab on tightly. Naruto, on the other hand, felt the pain subside, the mysterious voice echoing the words again, bouncing off the walls in his head. He reached his free hand up, digging his nails into Sokka's arm. Gritting his teeth, he answered the voice, his voice dripping with annoyance. "They would feel sorry for me, that I was too weak to do anything, and they would blame it on themselves." He yelled internally, blood leaking down his hand as he grabbed onto the blade tighter. "And what was your promise?" "To prove them wrong. What the dash?" Sokka never got to finish what he was saying before Naruto ripped the blade out from his leg in one smooth motion. Sokka, surprised by the action, didn't have time to move out of the way as the hilt of the sword smashed upwards into his jaw, sending his tumbling backwards. Sokka growled as he held his busted chin glaring at Naruto. caught off guard by the blonde's sudden attitude change, his eyes widening as he saw the hole on his leg had already fully healed. Not a cut in sight. Naruto grabbed the sword by the hilt, throwing it over to Sokka, forcing the black-haired male to dodge. Sokka leapt into the air, swinging his left foot down in a flying kick that sent a column of blue fire sailing across the forest floor, disintegrating everything in its path. Naruto didn't hesitate in his attack as he leaped up after Sokka, hands flying through seals as fast as he could. Water style, water dragon jutsu. He yelled, extending his arm out as the water from his previous jutsu came to life, forming a medium-sized dragon, and sent itself soaring after Sokka from his right. The black-haired man cursed before stopping his technique, using his momentum to narrowly dodge the dragon. Water style, water torrent wave. Sokka widened his eyes as the dragon exploded next to him, the sudden force taking the air out of him as he was sent flying down onto the floor, making a decent-sized crater. Naruto landed on his feet trying to catch his breath, wondering if that was enough to stop the man. Before Naruto could relish in any sort of victory, the body of Sokka suddenly poofed into smoke, replaced with a log of wood. Kawarimi? You little shit. Naruto turned around just in time to see a flame-covered foot come his way. Reacting quickly, he brought his forearm up to block the attack. He growled as the flames burned his arm as the force from the attack sent his body crashing to the floor. His head smacked against the floor, bouncing in pain, but Sokka didn't stop there, sending an axe kick to the boy's stomach. Naruto gasped as he felt his body submerge itself deeper into the soil beneath him. You bastard! I'm going to kill you, Sokka yelled, grabbing Naruto by the neck, lifting him up so he could stare at the boy in his eyes, his hand gripping Naruto's windpipe, making the blonde gasp for air. You really are a son of a bitch, aren't you? I'll admit you caught me by surprise, but it won't happen again. He yelled again, this time slamming Naruto into the nearest tree, almost snapping the log in two. Naruto winced as he forced his eyes back to Sokka's own yellow eyes. Finding the effort to grin, Naruto reached up trying to dig his nails into Sokka's cheek. Sokka, seeing the blonde in his grasp start to smile, felt a huge sense of anger wash over him. Scowling, his grip tightened on the blonde's neck, pushing him deeper into the tree, making the bark give out an unpleasant cracking sound. And what's so funny, brat? You got any last words before I kill you here? Naruto chuckled as he gave a curt nod, his smile only widening, generating his chakra to his body. Sunshine, he croaked out before vanishing from sight. Appearing directly behind the shocked body of Sokka, the older man widened his eyes as he turned his head, seeing the blonde boy. Naruto's eyes wide, showing his 3 Tomo Sharingan spinning widely in his left eye, catching Sokka in his line of sight, making his body freeze up. T the Sharingan. His body felt like it was paralyzed. His muscles refused to work, and all the feeling in his legs were gone. His feet seemingly cemented into the ground as he watched the blonde boy get closer to him. He couldn't even feel the chakra circulating in his body anymore. Naruto's hand came up grasping the back of Sokka's shirt, his free hand making an arching motion as the blood from his hand started to float beside his. Blood style, red spiral. Taking advantage of Sokka's loss of displacement from his genjutsu, the blood from his hand flowed upwards, taking the form of a 3-pronged spiral blade. Pulling Sokka back, and with a yell, he plunged the blood spiral through Sokka's chest, bursting through his stomach and taking his heart out of his body. The crunching sound from Sokka's insides played in Naruto's head as a silent scream tried to find its way out of the man's mouth. Why you be bastard? Naruto felt the man's body fall limp, only being held up by Naruto's jutsu. Naruto broke the jutsu, letting the blood spiral loose, its form splashing back into its original state. With a soft thud, Sokka's body fell to the ground lifeless. Naruto felt his eyes go wide in horror as his Sharingan eye traced over the body of a man that he killed, looking down to his hand, seeing it rock back and forth as he suddenly found it hard to breath. He didn't know what it would have felt like to take a life, but this wasn't what he was expecting. He felt awful, like he could empty his insides at any moment. Gripping his hand that ended it all, and forced his eyes shut, ignoring the growing wetness. Dread feeding his very core. Feeling his shoulders slump down. The face of pure fear of Sokka looking at him etched into his mind forever. You did the right thing. Naruto didn't react to the voice this time, letting his words linger in the back of his mind. This man was a member of the Blue Flames. Killing is what they did. They thrived off taking the lives of others, and taking whatever they would want. So, by taking his life, it should stop needless killing, right? Naruto felt his heartbeat speed up as his breathing became more erratic, feeling his head lean backwards, his feet kicking up a cloud of dirt as he hit the floor, his body suddenly weak from the excessive chakra use, completely unaware of the increasing footsteps making their way closer to him. Naruto, side of the right, ninja art, rabid dogs, Sai said, standing in place as 3 dogs made of pure ink materialized out of his scroll, growling as they jumped, tearing and ripping apart the flesh of the attacking shinobi. Shizuka appeared at his side, arm on his shoulder as she smirked at the dying ninja, all screaming for their life as they got ripped apart. Sai looked over to Shizuka, his face emotionless as he raised his brush back to his scroll. Titch-chan, please cover the rear. Shizuka growled at Sai, glaring at the boy as she threw a kunai behind them. Forming a single-handed seal, the kunai split apart, taking the shape of about 50 metallic Senbon needles. What have I said about calling me that? She yelled, ignoring the screams of the people that got caught up in her needle barrage. Sai just smiled at her before lifting his scroll up, pushing in where his drawing was at. It's the placeholder until I find a new name for you, Titch-chan, he said, forming a single seal as a large ink bear jumped from his scroll, roaring loudly as it swiped its large claws across several enemy shinobi's necks. Blood squirted out, coloring the monochromatic bear red as he took off to the opposite side of the room. Anko watched in amusement as she leaned on the wall, letting her students handle the rest of the enemies. After Sai and Shizuka effectively managed to kill the guards out front, they quickly snuck their way into the cabin. Anko took the lead, summoning snakes from her sleeves that took out the majority of the people inside. They didn't put up much of a fight, so she let her 2 students deal with the cleanup. There was a surprising amount of people inside. 30 to 40 shinobi crowded around a large table, not even aware of their entrance. Anko averted her eyes from her students as she calmly walked over to the table that she assumed the more important people seated. Stepping over a few bodies, she leaned over, scanning the table for any interesting contents. Raising an eyebrow, she bent down to pick up a bloodied folder that found its way onto the floor. Hearing footsteps get closer to her, "Find anything interesting, Snake-sensei?" "Snake-sensei? Really, Sai, you couldn't think of anything else?" Shizuka blanched, looking at Sai like he had grown a second head. He looked at her in confusion. "I thought it was fitting." Anko ignored their bickering as she opened the folder. Some of the papers inside were hard to read since they were stained with blood. Frowning, she took a seat on one of the chairs, placing the folder down, letting the papers fall out. Sai and Shizuka peered over their sensei's shoulders. It seems the genus what they had stolen has already been sold to a group of missing nin. This was a complete bust, Shizuka said, but Anko quickly shook her head at the girl. While the wood might have been sold, this should send a message to the Blue Flames to not target Tazuna again, Anko said, narrowing her eyes as she traced over the documents again. She had a weird feeling in the pit of her stomach. Something seemed off, something she was missing. She turned over to Sai, motioning the folder closest to her. "Can you please look this folder over, Sai? You have a much better eye for these types of things." Sai only nodded, taking the folder and taking a seat at the table, moving the dead body that was in his way. Anko looked back to Shizuka, a hand on her chin. "Shizuka, I want you to search all of these bodies to see if they have any useful information on them." Shizuka nodded before leaving her sensei. Anko stood in place as she narrowed her eyes at the cabin, the feeling in her stomach growing uneasy by the second. "This room is quiet, quieter than any room I've ever been in," she thought to herself, taking a step closer to the wall, letting her hand trace the woodwork. Naruto and Narumi should have been capable enough to take out those guards outside. Then what is taking so long? If anything were to happen, surely we would have heard it happening outside. She mused as nails then moved over the wooden wall, tracing invisible lines, letting it dig into the log. It made no sound at all. You seem lost in thought, Snake-sensei. Enko turned to see Sai staring at her, his expression stoic, never changing as he held the folder under his arm. Enko nodded her head at Sai, raising an eyebrow in thought. Something is off about this cabin, she said, and Sai nodded in agreement, admit a bit hesitant. Yes, I couldn't shake the feeling myself either. And Blondie, Kun, and Narumi-san are nowhere to be seen, he finished, narrowing his eyes in thought. I'm going to go out and look for them. Sai, stay with Shizuka. I'll be back. Before she had time to make her leave, the door to the cabin flew open, as Narumi walked in carrying an unmoving Naruto slung over her shoulder. The rest of Team 11 went silent as they watched the Namikaze walk through. Enko broke out of her trance, quickly making her way over to the smaller girl and forcefully taking Naruto from her grasp. Enko's eyes widening as she saw the state of her student, dread filling her for a moment, automatically thinking the worst of her favorite blonde. Sai and Shizuka got to their senses as they huddled around Naruto. Sai reached out, pushing his index finger into the blonde's lower jaw. He breathed out a sigh of relief. He's just unconscious. Enko and Shizuka let out a matching sigh of relief as well, both their hearts calming at Sai's words. Enko then looked up, sending a chilling glare over to Narumi. The older Namikaze gulped at the look Enko sent her. Shizuka already getting to work on patching Naruto up. Care to tell me what happened to him, Narumi? She said between her teeth, her anger starting to get the better of her, rethinking her decision if it was smart to let the two siblings pair up together. She had to bite her cheek in hopes to quell the strong urge to stab Narumi right between the eyes. Narumi only nodded as she began to retell the events that led her to finding Naruto in the woods. From getting separated, to her killing the shinobi that attacked her, and finally finding her brother in the middle of the woods, lying next to a dead body. And that's when I found him. He was already unconscious when I got there. But the man he was facing, he was already dead. Narumi finished, happy to see Enko's death glare finally subside. Shizuka nodded as he finished, looking over Naruto, shocked to see that he sustained practically no injuries. That would make sense. He doesn't look to be hurt at all, just suffering from chakra exhaustion, she said, grabbing a hold of his pant leg and raising an eyebrow. But the strange thing is that he should have injuries. What do you mean, Titsujin? Shizuka grumbled at the name, but explained anyway, grabbing Naruto's left leg, showing them the decent-sized hole that resided just under his thigh. His pants seemed to have been punctured somehow, but not sliced, she said, placing her hand in the hole and using her fingers to open it wider. You can clearly see that it was stabbed through. It's stained with blood. But there isn't even a hole in his skin, she said. The rest of the team looked at each other in confusion. That certainly was odd. Narumi felt her body tense and her eyes narrow. The voice in her head made its appearance once again. How strange indeed. Narumi pushed the voice away into the deepest parts of her mind, not wanting to be bothered by it at this moment. She cleared her throat, gathering the attention of the rest of the team. Well, the good thing is that Naruto and I is perfectly safe, she said happily, proud to know that her brother managed to protect himself. Granted, the enemy he was facing was probably no stronger than an Chunin in strength. She mused to herself before getting to her feet. Narumi-san, you say Naruto only fought one person, right? Did you have the body with you? Narumi nodded as she pulled out a sealing scroll and tossed it to Enko. The purple-haired Jounin caught it with ease before walking to the table again and opening the scroll. After the smoke cleared from the scroll, Enko felt her face fall in shock. What the fuck? Sai raised an eyebrow at his sensei, getting up to see what had shocked her, only to relish in surprise. That's Sakashin, Sai said, pointing at the mutilated body in front of him. Narumi frowned. She had never heard that name before in her life, but the two of them seemed to be making a big deal out of it. Why would they be so shocked to see that they ran into a weak missing nin? It was fairly common to run into at least one other shinobi while traveling from town to town, especially country to country. Shizuka next to her had no problem voicing her confusion. Ahu Sakashin. Anko closed her eyes and brought her hand up and started to rub her forehead, not sure what to make of the man's dead body. Sakashin, an upper B-class jounin level missing nin from a Wagakure, and the founder of the Blue Flames, Anko said, making both females go wide-eyed, both for completely different reasons. Shizuka managed a small smile as a chuckle escaped her throat. While I had no idea Naruto was that strong, I'll make sure not to underestimate him next time, she said, glad to know that her teammate wasn't weak. I mean, he did manage to take down a jounin-level shinobi after all. That's interesting. Anko raises an eyebrow, hearing the black-haired boy next to her whisper to himself. Looking over at him, she saw his eyes were closed, his eyebrows scrunched in concentration. They watched in tense silence as they awaited the boy to speak. Moving slowly, Sai reached under his arm, grabbing the file Anko had given him earlier. Flipping it open, he picked out a page. When you told me to look through this folder, I found quite an interesting amount of things, he said, motioning the others to follow as he placed them on the table for pages scattered out. Taking in a deep breath, he spoke. All 4 of these pages are just updates and sales that the group has made in the past few months. Nothing out of the ordinary. But he pointed at the edge of the pages, running his finger along the border until it reached the bottom of the page. Tapping his finger a few times, all 4 of these have matching sealing arrays on them. I'm not very good at sealing, so I can't tell what they do exactly. He finished looking over to the female Namikaze, noticing her stoic expression. Narumi-san, if I recall, sealing runs in your family. Do you recognize this type of seal? Narumi stepped up, picking up the pages and examining them closer. I'm not really into seals. Tusan is the only one really interested in them, she said, gaining a frown from Sai. But before he could say anything to Narumi, she continued speaking. But from what I could tell, the sealing array has a special rule that must be followed. What kind of rule? Narumi looked up to Anko. I'm not so sure myself. It could be anything really. Only blonde-haired people could open it. Or black-haired. It could even matter on what your blood type is, or what chakra affinity you have. The possibilities are endless. Sai nodded, crossing his arms over his chest. I see. That is quite a problem. It must be important if they went through all that trouble to hide it under such a seal. Then that would explain this cabin too, Anko said, drawing the attention of the 3 kids. Anko elaborated. I noticed something weird when we entered this cabin. They had no idea we were even coming. It's like they didn't hear a single thing that was happening until we finally came through the door. What do you mean, Anko-sensei? That there must be a seal somewhere in this cabin that blocks out all sound coming in or out. Some sort of soundproof seal. She mused, finally making sense of the bizarre situation. Crossing her arms under her breast, she gave a deep sigh. But why would they put a soundproof seal on the cabin? What possible good would they have done for them? Fascinating, Sai said, grabbing the last piece of paper hidden away in the folder, showing it to the group. This was the only page that didn't have a sealing array. I tried to see if there was a genjutsu or secret chakra message hidden somewhere, but I found nothing of the sort. Then what's got you so fascinated by it? This. Sai turned to Narumi and Anko, reading aloud from the page. A battle of blue and red commences. Scorching earth with a magnificent blue hue, where a soundless room will stand, awaiting visitors and secret information. Once the hue has been smothered, a boy is his killer, allowing for an outstanding debut, to meet on the next full moon, in a land made of frozen colorless white, Sai said, taking a moment to let his words sink in, giving them enough time to digest what they heard. Anko was the first to recover, blinking in confusion and crossing her arms under her breasts, the weird sinking feeling in her stomach returning as she closed her eyes and thought, what does that mean? It almost sounds like a fortune. Sai nodded his head at Shizuka in agreement. Rubbing his chin, I agree. I had thought the same thing myself, he said, taking a short pause to gather his thoughts. His thoughts made him frown, getting quite caught up in this note. It talks about a soundless room, which would have to be this cabin, along with secret info, and my only guess would be the ceiling arrays on the rest of the notes he finished. Narumi peered over to the unmoving object of their inner thoughts. The first line, "A battle of blue and red commences." Could it really be referencing Naruto and Ai? She mused aloud. Well, his eyes are blue, and he uses water jutsu. So the red would have to be the Sasuke guy, right? He is a fire user, after all. Anko shook her head at Shizuka. Sakashin was known for his use of blue fire. It's what made him famous, and gave him the idea for the blue flames. Shizuka frowned at her explanation, not making sense of what the red and the fortune could be. Skipping in her thoughts, she heard Sai speak from her left. While that may be a mystery only Blondie-kun knows. We will have to ask him when he wakes up, he said, making the three of them nod. And when the blue hue is smothered, is that referring to Sokka's death? And a debut? Who could possibly be debuting? Whatever it is, this doesn't seem like a coincidence. It feels like real fortune-telling. Anko pursed her lips in concentration. The more her and her team kept thinking about the current circumstances, the more bizarre it seemed to get. In all her life as a ninja, she had never come across anything like this before, not even when she was training under the snake Sannin Orochimaru. The whole thing was beginning to sound like a mystery. More and more questions kept getting asked, and they didn't have an answer to a single one of them. Glancing over at Naruto's still body, watching as his chest raised ever so slightly with his breaths. Narrowing her eyes in recognition, whatever was happening, she knew it was because Naruto had taken the life of Sakashin. Could whoever gave this fortune really see the future? Where am I? Naruto muttered as he felt his eyes flutter open. He was met with a pitch-black room, darkness as far as the eye can see. The sound of running water echoed into the never-ending abyss as he felt how damp his back felt as he laid on his back, submerged several inches in water. Using his arms, he picked himself up until he was in a sitting position, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness around him. Looking around proved quite difficult with the absence of light, not understanding exactly what was going on. Oddly enough, Naruto felt a strong sense of comfort as he sat on the floor. The water was warm as it guided over his body, soothing any negative thoughts he may have. It was almost a familiar feeling, like he had been here before. While he still didn't know where exactly he was, he found that he didn't really mind. Naruto decided to get to his feet, letting the water splash. He wobbled slightly as he stood up. His body felt heavier than usual. He let his eyes wander as he started walking forward, letting the cold air push his body forward. The further he walked in, he started to hear a faint dripping of water droplets, falling in tune with his own footsteps. There were no walls, no ceilings the more he walked in. The familiar feeling returned to Naruto as a large gust of wind suddenly picked up, making Naruto bring his hands up to cover his face from the pressure. His shirt started to flutter from the unexpected gust, letting the wind caress his exposed flesh. The gust continued on as Naruto forced his body to react, forcing a step towards the oncoming assault. Naruto squinted his eyes, taking another step, one after another, until he felt his knees begin to buckle. Naruto panted as he fell to his knees, trying his best to not get blown backwards. Then, without warning, the gust suddenly vanished, leaving no trace of its existence. Naruto blinked in surprise as he felt the assault on his body stop. Lowering his arms so he could see in ahead of his, noticing several small lanterns dangling by rope, swaying back and forth, trying their best to dimly light the dark abyss. Focusing his vision, he was able to faintly make out what seemed to be a large gate, metal bars going up as far as the eye could see. The bars were several inches apart, just wide enough to let a human body walk through easily. Then it happened. A loud roar echoed in the chasm, making Naruto cover his face again under pressure, wincing in surprise as the roar reached his eyes. It was loud enough to start pushing the water at his feet back, making the blonde slide with it. Peeking through his fingers, Naruto felt his eyes widen in shock. A sudden feeling of fear pumped through his veins as his eyes made contact with what was kept hidden behind the gate. The beast towered over Naruto, looking down at the blonde with its lone pupil. Its large yellow eye gleamed as its roar died down. The beast's jaw closed, taking up the majority of its face. The horns on his forehead matching the ones on his jaw. The turtle-like body moved forward, allowing the light from the lanterns to shine off the gray shell. But Naruto wasn't looking at the shell or the eye. It was the three large swinging tails behind the beast. Each tail acted on its own, smashing the ground, sending a large shockwave through the room. Naruto yelled in fear as he fell to the ground, not believing what he was seeing. He tried to speak, form anything close to words, but each syllable ended up dying in his throat. "It's good to finally meet you, Naruto." Naruto gulped at the beast in front of him, spoke his name. The voice wasn't as deep as he was expecting. It sounded more feminine as his human-like arms crossed over one another before resting its large head on them. After some time, Naruto finally managed to squeak out, why you're the SSMbai?" The Sambai huffed, letting out a small cloud of smoke before nodding. One of the tails encircled his shell, resting over its right eye. It said nothing as Naruto found the courage to stand again, staying a good distance away from the demon. "What are you doing here? And where even am I?" he asked, trying his best to not stutter, as the Sambai let out a small chuckle, freaking Naruto out even more. "This is your mindscape. As for what I am doing here, I'm afraid I cannot answer that question," the Sambai said, making Naruto raise an eyebrow in confusion. Taking a hesitant step backward, "I inside my mind? Does that mean you are—" The Sambai watched as the blonde's eyes went wide in shock, raising his hands up to grip his locks of hair. His body began to shake, and he found it harder and harder to control his breathing. "TNR-YUS sealed in me," he whispered. The shock was becoming too much for the boy. He was close to fainting at any moment. He had recalled overhearing several conversations at home about Narumi and Natsu being able to communicate to the beast sealed inside them. They often referred to talking to the Kyuubi in their mindscape, where they could meet and talk to the demon. The Sambai looked at Naruto, raising its remaining two tails and sinking them into the water next to him. The water underneath him gained a nice bluish hue. Pushing his tails further, the water around Naruto started to glow, shining up into the blonde face. The water slowly started to make its way around Naruto. Naruto turned his attention to the glowing liquid as it wrapped around the blonde in a thin layer, almost feeling like a blanket as he felt the anxiety and shock slowly fade from his system. His throat no longer felt empty, and he found it much easier to breathe. Looking back up to the expressionless demon in front of him, the Sambai didn't move, only removing his tails from the water. Naruto's eyes watched the tails return to their swinging position as the fear completely faded from his system. The water around him then fell apart, soaking through Naruto's clothes, but he didn't seem to notice. "What did you do?" he asked, noticing his voice didn't waver like it had done before. "I merely used a jutsu to calm you down. I call it soothing water," the beast said. Naruto just blinked in response. He did feel calm, calmer than he had ever felt in his life. He noticed that the room had become far more lit than before, chalking it up to the Sambai's reveal. Naruto stayed seated on the ground as he peered back over to the bijou in front of him. He sensed no hostility whatsoever. Hell, he didn't sense anything at all. "How?" he started, taking in a deep breath. "Did you get sealed inside of me?" he asked, noticing for the first time an emotion to pass through the beast's lone eye. Silence filled the area as the Sambai sat in thought. "Like I said earlier, I do not know. The last thing I remember was being in my last host's body. When I woke up, I was inside you. I don't remember anything in between," the Sambai said, making Naruto frown. He was sure the Sambai wasn't attacking the village with the Kyuubi all those years ago. He would have heard about it from the academy or his parents, especially if they were the ones to seal it into him. "I would say it's been about 4 years since I've been sealed inside you." 4 years! Naruto yelled in shock, jumping to his feet as he stared at the bijou with wide eyes. The demon only nodded as Naruto threw his hands up in the air. How did I never notice you for 4 years? That's a fucking long time to not realize a demon is sealed inside you, he said, irritated. The Sanbai chuckled, gathering Naruto's attention. You seem to be taking my presence in you rather well. Better than most people would. Naruto hesitantly nodded, scratching the back of his head. Well, that water-soothing thing you did earlier helped a ton, he said. He smiled sheepishly, an awkward laugh escaping his mouth. The Sanbai twirled the tails until they wrapped around his body before speaking in a low voice. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Then I guess it's time to tell you about this seal. Naruto tilted his head at the demon, narrowing his eyes in suspicion. The Sanbai merely shook his head at its current jailer. Not in a bad way. You see, whoever sealed me inside of you was no amateur. They use several very advanced and complex sealing arrays. It completely conceals my presence inside of you. It's even able to mask my chakra completely. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the demon's explanation, shocked to hear that such a powerful sealing jutsu existed. He knew seals were powerful, but a seal that could mask even the insane chakra of a bijou? Almost unheard of. Sure, sealing the demon away was an option, but a Hyuga or a good sensor could still see and sense the chakra. But it also hindered contact from the two of us for quite some time. If I had to guess, the seal would allow you to come and see me after you had made your first kill. Naruto flinched as the memories of his fight with Sasuke plagued his mind. His eyes fell downcast as he clenched his fists, looking away from the demon. He had somewhat forgotten that he had taken another's life. It was easy to forget when you find out you have a full-on demon in your gut. Naruto felt the calming sensation return on his legs, and he looked back up at the demon, a tinge of gratefulness flashing in his eyes. The bijou only nodded in response. Then I guess that explains why I didn't know you were here. Yes, while we have had zero contact, that didn't mean we were totally alone. My presence in you has certainly had an effect. Huh? In what way? The Sanbai chuckled. You were born with a natural chakra affinity for water ninjutsu. But because of my presence and chakra, your water affinity is heightened, allowing the use of a rare ninjutsu, blood ninjutsu. Naruto's eyes went wide, remembering that jutsu he had used against the finished Sasuke. He looked down at his hand, the one that was sliced open as he grabbed Sasuke's sword. The very same hand that morphed his own blood into a 3-pronged spiral weapon that forcefully removed the heart of his enemy. He balled his fist tightly, his knuckles turning pale. I see. I guess that does explain the jutsu. I have never done anything like that before. I didn't even know I could. But why blood? He asked. It's what my chakra had affected first. It must have been an altercation from the ceiling or just luck. Naruto nodded, taking it in stride. He would have to believe it for now since there was no other explanation. He didn't even know it was possible to control blood, not wanting to dwell too much on all that he has learned. The surprises just kept on coming for Naruto, and he wasn't sure he would ever get over this. And if he did, it would take a long, long time. He turned back to the bijou, eyeing the large cage that was holding the beast at bay. So, how do you feel about this? The Sanbai shot a sharp glance at Naruto, masking his look of confusion in his lone eye as the Sanbai watched the blonde scratch his head, avoiding eye contact. The demon stayed silent for a few minutes, watching Naruto shift uncomfortably in place. What do you mean? Well, I mean I'm sure you didn't want to be sealed inside of me. Hell, we don't even know how you got inside me. So I don't know, it must suck to be back in a human body, behind a cage and all, he muttered, hoping not to offend the bijou in any way. The Sanbai blinked again, before breaking out into a toothy grin. The loud, booming laughter was impossible to stop. The Sanbai's laugh echoed in the spacious room, making Naruto's shirt flutter. You are certainly an interesting host. Out of all the humans I've been chained to, you are the only one to ask such a question, the Sanbai said. Naruto blushed awkwardly as he took the compliment, not sure what else he could do at the moment. The Sanbai breathed out again as the laughter died down, uncrossing his arms until he was seated upright. Sanbai curled his humanoid hand into a fist before offering it to Naruto. The fist came closer to the blonde, stopping just a few feet from him. Naruto looked between the fist and the Sanbai's eye, curiosity reflecting within his own. The Sanbai grinned again, or the closest thing a turtle-humanoid crab-demon hybrid considered grinning. Then how about we make a deal? What kind of deal? Since we are chained together, I will offer my assistance to you. In simple terms, I will train you on how to use my power. Naruto felt his eyes widen as he looked at the Sanbai in shock. The Bijou was just offering his chakra? Naruto still wasn't sure how he was feeling about the whole situation. He wanted to get strong all on his own and prove to his parents that he could be a dependable shinobi. The idea of borrowed power felt wrong to him, almost like cheating. But I do have my dead sensei's Sharingan in my eye. How is this any different? And Narumi and Natsu both have a Bijou sealed inside them. Naruto thought to himself as he looked over the darkening form of the Sanbai. And for whatever reason, whether it be fate or just some random coincidence that was chalked up to just dumb luck, a Bijou was also residing within him, offering his power in the form of a deal. Speaking of, and what would I have to do? The Sanbai chuckled as he pushed his closed fist an inch closer, letting his lone eyes soften somewhat. I want to live in peace, lead a comfortable life. My last host was not your typical shinobi. It was a living hell to be chained to him. But you have a kind heart, even if it is shrouded with curtains of darkness from your past. You have never wavered in your resolve and have only pushed forward. I've scanned through your memory since I've been chained in here, and I believe I am certain that within you I can finally obtain the peace I have been looking for. Naruto stood rooted to place. He stared forward, utterly dumbstruck, as the demon's words as they loudly echoed in his head. A world where they could live in peace, where a demon could finally be free, away from the wrongings all those who have instilled rage and hatred into our everyday lives, being used as a bargaining chip for political power and to become a weapon. He tightly clenched his fists at his sides, watching his reflection waver in the calming crystal-clear water beneath his feet. He sucked in a breath as he looked into the reflection of his Sharingan. The slow currents in the water made it hard to focus as the three tomo had started to spin rapidly, taking on a whole new shape entirely. That is a lot of pressure to put onto me, Sanbai-sama. Aisabu, you may call me Aisabu, Mao Maya Boku, where legends have gone to try and learn and master the secret techniques of senjutsu. A very complex technique that requires an intense amount of focus to be able to pull in energy and chakra from the very world around you. We call this special type of chakra nature energy. It not only makes you significantly faster and stronger, it also boosts your ninjutsu and taijutsu to the highest caliber while increasing your chakra reserves. While many have trained to master senjutsu, there have only been 2 recorded users in the elemental nations to have ever learned the technique. One was the Shodai Hokage Hashirama Senju, a master in his own right. The second being Jiraiya of the Sannin, and even he couldn't even fully master the art. Okay, it's been long enough. Natsu, get out of the waterfall, a deep voice said, leaning on a large stone statue as he picked his ear with one of his fingers before flicking it away, adjusting his eyes to the large waterfall hanging just above his head. Around him were several large trees with flowers blooming all around. In the center was a small pond where the waterfall was dumping its excess. The man sighed as he saw the young boy he was looking after not move an inch as the water came crashing down onto him again, pushing him off his platform and into the pond below. Natsu, take a break before I make you, he said, his voice taking a serious edge. Natsu emerged from the pond gasping for air, his spiky red hair falling into his eyes as he rapidly shook his head. But Jiraiya-sensei, I'm almost there, I can feel it. Just a few more minutes. Natsu yelled. Jiraiya shook his head. No can do, your father left me here to watch over you, and I want to make sure I don't hand you off looking like this guy, he said back, patting the statue he was leaning on. Natsu grumbled to himself as he quickly made his way out of the water. After getting out of the pond, he threw himself onto the soft grass, balling his fists in anger. "Why can't I do this?" he said angrily. Staring into the passing clouds, he sneered, digging his nails into the ground. Jiraiya gave a hearty laugh as he took a seated position next to the soaking wet redhead. Natsu turned and glared at the man. "Come on, kid, don't be too hard on yourself. It's only been 3 days since you started training. It took me several years to learn senjutsu, and I'm still not even a master at it," he said, trying to ease the boy's growing frustration. Natsu only grimaced, looking away from Jiraiya and back to the waterfall. "Where did Tusen go? I haven't seen him since he dropped me off." Minato went back to the village for a few days, said he had something important he had to take care of. Natsu frowned, finding himself balling his fists in irritation once more. He fought back a sneer, having to bite the inside of his cheek to restrain himself. "What could be more important than my senjutsu training right now? On the bright side, I heard your brother Naruto is progressing rather well, from what I've heard from their sensei anyway," he said with a chuckle. Natsu scowled as hell sat upright, shaking his head as he stared at his reflection in the water. The ripples morphed over his face, letting his tongue glide across his sharpened, enlarged canines, standing up with his back to Jiraiya. "Whatever, it's not like that baka can catch up to us anyway. So, what's the point?" Jiraiya frowned as Natsu spoke, crossing his arms over his chest. "Now Natsu, just cause Naruto is a slow learner doesn't mean he won't be strong. It'll just take him a little longer than the rest of us." "A little longer?" Natsu said, turning his head slightly to meet his sensei's deep black eyes. His voice took a sharper edge as his own purple orbs narrowed. "If I recall, you actually had to have training to get strong. And aren't you the one told Tusen and Ka-sen to focus on me and Narumi, since we were Jinchuriki?" he finished, letting his eyes linger a moment longer on Jiraiya. The Sannin grimly nodded his head at the boy's words. He did tell the two new parents that focusing on mastering the Kyuubi's chakra was far more important than anything else, no matter the cost. He didn't know how far Minato and Kushina would take his words, but he didn't see the need to interject. They weren't his kids after all, and he already deduced that Narumi and Natsu were the fabled child of prophecy that the Take Sage has spoken of. Yes, well, you two were more important being Jinchuriki, but that doesn't mean Naruto won't be strong. Me might never be as strong as you or Narumi dash. Exactly, and since he won't, then I don't care. Natsu cut in darkly, venom oozing off his lips as he spoke. Jiraiya sighed in annoyance as he watched Natsu walk back off into the waterfall. He just couldn't understand how Minato was able to handle that kid. He wore his heart on his sleeve. When he was upset or passionate about something, it would shine on that boy's face for the world to see, and he had no problem vocalizing his thoughts no matter the time or place. But it only served to remind the people around him about who his mother was, since Kushina was actually a lot worse at balancing her emotions. The boy was definitely unique, and Jiraiya couldn't help but acknowledge the boy's strength. Being so young and already a chunin was a big feat. The only thing keeping him from proceeding even further was the Kyuubi. Unlike his sister Narumi, who managed to get on friendly terms with the beast inside of her rather quickly, Natsu was having a much more difficult time. It seems the Kyuubi in Natsu was much angrier at being ripped apart, making it a much harsher experience for Natsu. Jiraiya put his thoughts on pause as he got to his feet, stretching his back as he made his way back to Natsu. He still had to look after his training after all. "Enko-sensei, why do I have to carry Naruto?" "What? You telling me you don't like having Blondie here wrapped around you?" That isn't what I meant," Shizuka said with an annoyed huff as she adjusted the still sleeping blonde on her back, his head resting on her neck as she fought back a blush from the close proximity. She wasn't used to being this close to a member of the opposite sex. Her village would have banned this behavior until she found a suitable husband, so it was a strange change of pace for her. She tried her best to see the amused grin on her sensei's face as they walked quietly into the woods back to Konoha. After making their way back to Tazuna Town after a successful raid on the Blue Flames base, Kisa was quick to offer more than enough pay for the mission, almost doubling the amount for both Team 11's and Narumi's own mission. She offered to let them stay overnight free of charge, but Enko was quick to decline her generous offer, saying that they needed to get back to Konoha. So after a quick rest, the whole squad left the now peaceful village, and were making steady progress back to Konoha. Each step made everyone more and more worried as Naruto was still unconscious and yet to wake up, which was strange since he didn't have any injuries, and was only suffering from a regular case of chakra exhaustion. Anko tried to suppress her worry for Naruto with her regular teasing and words of encouragement to her team. It seemed to work for the most part, but Anko kept a singular curious eye on Narumi. She had been strangely quiet since they left Azuna. "Sorry, Tich-chan. Snake-sensei told me it would be funny if you carried Blondie-kun." Shizuka turned over to glare at her sensei. If looks could kill, Anko would be a pile of ash as the Jounin looked away from Shizuka, whistling innocently to herself, trying and failing to hide the look of enjoyment on her face. Shizuka growled as she felt her fists tighten. "Damn it, sensei. Could you stop yelling, please? It's starting to hurt my ears." Shizuka turned her head slightly to look at Naruto, a look of irritation on her face. "Yeah, well, they're just so, Naruto." Her annoyance soon turned to relief as she saw the blonde's eyes flutter open, looking at her with a tired expression. The rest of the team vocalized their joy in his awakening as they stopped their trek back to the village. Anko reached over to ruffle his messy blonde spikes. "Damn kid, about time you woke up. We were starting to get worried that you died on us," she said with a grin. Internally, she was jumping for joy that he woke up, not wanting to admit how worried she was about him. Naruto just chuckled at Anko as I gave him a nod, but Naruto could see the brief flash of joy through his onyx eyes. Shizuka bent down, allowing Naruto to slide back onto his feet. He thanked the black-haired girl before cracking his back with a sigh. "Happy to see you're awake, Naruto. You've been out for almost 8 hours. Naruto's eyes widened as his mouth fell open in shock. 8 hours, he mumbled as he shook his head in disbelief, looking at Anko for confirmation. The Jounin just nodded her head as Naruto frowned. It definitely felt like he was only out for about an hour. "I would like to know how you managed to kill Sakashin." Narumi finally spoke. She asked with a raised eyebrow as she stalked closer to Naruto, her expression not matching her innocent question. Her blue eyes bored into Naruto's own, trying her best to gather any information about her enigmatic brother. Naruto could only stare at her with annoyance, just like her to get on his case without a second thought. He bit the inside of his cheek. He could feel the anger start to boil down within him as she got closer to him. Slowly, the tension in the air got really thick. A sudden silence washed over them as they situated in their respective positions. Narumi could feel the annoyed looks from the rest of Team 11, and if she minded, she didn't say anything about it as she kept her focus on Naruto. Naruto bit his cheek harder, letting the metallic flavor course through his mouth as his eyes narrowed. "Relax, Naruto. There is no reason to get into an argument about this," Aisabu said calmly, his voice soothing Naruto's anger as the blonde breathed a silent sigh. Naruto let the words linger in his mind for a while before he thanked the beast inside of him. Aisabu gave him an internal nod in response. Naruto knew that Aisabu was right. If he made a big deal about this, then it would no doubt raise suspicion about him, especially with his family. And when Narumi has her mind set on figuring something out, she would not stop until she won. She would most likely get angry at him until she forced it out of him. So Naruto gave a sigh. "I'll tell you all when we report to Hokage-sama. I'm sure he would like to know too," he said, turning away from his sister and back to his team. Narumi narrowed her eyes at her brother's back, feeling her knuckles turning white as they balled into tight fists. She was about to protest when Anko sent her a chilling glare. Narumi opted to stay silent, pursing her lips together as the team silently made their way back to Konoha. Narumi couldn't tear her eyes off her brother as he and Shizuka mumbled stuff to each other, with Sai occasionally offering his 2 cents. She heard a deep chuckle echo deep inside of her, the demonic voice speaking loudly. "It seems your little brother is hiding something from you, Narumi," the QB said, grinning mischievously as his words seemed to have affected Narumi rather harshly, biting her tongue in irritation. She internally nodded in agreement with the fox. "It appears so, and I intend to figure out what it is," she responded to the fox. The fox's laughter died down, giving off a playful smirk as his 9 tails swung happily behind him. Or do you think he's keeping it from you because you're his sister? Shut your fucking mouth. She bit back angrily, her eyes glowing red as the fox's chakra started to flow within her. Anger coursed through her as the fox mocked her, belittling her once again. Each step she took slowly broke apart the ground under her, lowering her head, allowing the shadow of the night to obscure her vision even more. I swear I will find out what you're keeping from me. Naruto and I. Minato Namikaze frowned to himself as he sat alone in his office. Papers were scattered everywhere on his desk as he ran a hand through his blonde hair. It's been 4 days since he had dropped his son Natsu off at Mount Mayaboku, and once he returned things were starting to look grim. Damn! Why are the Akatsuki starting to make their move? Of all times, Jiraiya-sensei said it would take them 3 more years, he thought to himself as he clamped his hands together, thinking about the terrorist group who calls themselves the Akatsuki, a group of notorious missing nin from all the major shinobi villages, grouping together under one unnamed leader. While their goal has remained unknown for the past few years, Jiraiya with his spy network had confirmed that their primary target was the capture of the Jinchuriki in order to extract their bijou forcefully from their bodies. Their methods in doing so still were a mystery to the world, and what their goal was after obtaining all 9 bijou. A bunch of scenarios had gone through his head on ways to stop the criminal organization, and each answer ended with strengthening up his children in order to control the Kimbi's chakra, in order to fend themselves against the S-Class group. Minato sighed as he sat straighter in his seat, looking at the mess of papers in front of him again, his eyes blinking in thought as he leaned forward, resting his arm on his desk. With his free hand, he pushed some of the papers away and picked up one that had caught his eye, one that had drawn him in since he first received it. It was a letter from Yukigakure, the land of snow, concerning several agreements to a trading truce between the 2 villages. The thing that had struck Minato as odd was that the village itself was still rather small and separated. It had one major town that held most of the population, and several smaller towns, all stagnant around the snow-covered land. He hummed and thought as he thought back to his visit to Yukigakure just a few months ago, how separated the major town was from the rest. He was broken out of his thoughts as his secretary walked through the door. Hokage-sama, Narumi-sama, and Team 11 have both returned from their missions. Minato nodded frantically as he felt happiness and guilt invade him simultaneously. That's great. Can you send them all in? Yes, Hokage-sama. Minato watched her leave as his thoughts started to wander again. Why was his daughter with Team 11? Naruto's team. Frankly, Minato had forgotten that he sent Naruto out on a C-rank mission altogether. The door creaked open again as all 4 shinobi walked in, bowing to him respectfully. He offered a big smile to Narumi and the rest of the Team 11, his smile falling slightly limp as his eyes moved over to Naruto. Reporting back Tusan from my B-rank mission. Reporting back Hokage-sama from Team 11's C-rank mission, along with assisting Narumi here with her B-rank mission. Minato resisted the urge to widen his eyes as he looked between both Narumi and Naruto. They were standing as far away from each other as possible. He shifted his eyes to Narumi, motioning her to explain her mission. She did so with practiced ease as she relayed the information back perfectly to Minato, ending on Team 11's appearance and the attacking of the Blue Flames. Minato without a doubt was shocked to hear that both their missions had escalated rather drastically. He looked back over to Anko, his eyes going serious. Anko, why did you and your team stay behind? This was easily an upper B-class mission. Endangering the lives of 3 newly appointed genin team was irrational, he scolded. Anko hesitantly nodded as she bowed to the yondaime, not out of respect, but to hide the scowl that morphed on her lips. With all due respect, Hokage-sama, I was more than confident in my team's abilities to handle this mission. Like stated before in the team assessment meeting, my team has been nothing but stellar. Sai used to be an umbu under the teaching of the village elder Danzo. Shizuka here is only a genin in title. Her strength is far beyond a genin her age, and those 2 worked together to take out more than 30 shinobi on this mission, she said, stopping Minato dead in his tracks. She took a quick look at Naruto before she continued. Naruto here was able to trap more than 5 shinobi in a genjutsu easily, and even managed to kill Sakashin, the leader of the Blue Flame, single-handedly. Minato had to stop himself from opening his eyes any wider at the info. He snapped his head over to Naruto in shock, asking for confirmation. Naruto gave a curt nod as he looked away from Minato, seemingly more interested in the paintings on the wall than the conversation. Minato tried to compose himself as he coughed into his fist, clearing his throat as he looked between the 4 shinobi, more specifically his 2 kids. Getting over his initial shock, he nodded. "Well then, I trust your judgment, Anko. They are your students, after all. You know them best," he said, wincing from his own words. Anko, pleased to hear Miyano say that, bowed again and stepped back next to her team. "Naruto, I think it's time you explain to all of us here how you managed to kill Sokka." All eyes turned to Narumi as she spoke, her blue eyes never leaving her brother. The air got several times thicker as both Namikaze's kids looked at one another. Anko was about to speak up in defense for Naruto until the blonde spoke himself. "I just got lucky. I managed to catch him in a genjutsu before one of his fireballs disintegrated me. When he was distracted, I just walked up behind him and stabbed him in the back." It was a partial truth. While those 2 things did happen, he didn't explain how they happened, making sure to keep his Sharingan and blood jutsu a secret until he really needed to. He was more lenient in letting that particular jutsu known, but he had no idea who the extent was and would reveal it in due time. Narumi narrowed her eyes again, clearly not happy in his explanation. Before she could retort, Minato spoke up. "Wow, Naruto, I'm impressed. Amazing work. He was a Jounin-level shinobi," Minato said happily, ignorant to the room's growing atmosphere. Naruto nodded his head awkwardly, not sure how to feel at the praise. A cough grabbed the attention in the room as Anko stepped forward once again. Begrudgingly, she motions Narumi to follow suit. Minato waited patiently as they handed him a folder. Minato raised an eyebrow in confusion, quickly stacking the loose papers on his desk neatly away before opening the folder. Picking one up, he read through it carefully. It was several pages documenting all sales that the Blue Flames have made in the past 4 years, garnering anywhere from low amounts to high amounts, and to who exactly they were sold to. He silently registered to memory all the items that Iwagakure and Kumogakure had purchased from the group. We had found these files in the base that the Blue Flames were using at the time. They range from the past 4 years, but that isn't the interesting part. "It's the sealing array here, isn't it?" Mianto said, tracing his hand over the small array gently. He scrunched his nose and thought as Anko nodded. She patted Sai on the shoulder, making the boy shift uncomfortably. Sai here managed to find those sealing arrays hidden on all 4 pages. Narumi-sen said that the seal all follows a certain rule that must be followed in order to activate it. She finished, making Narumi nod in agreement. Minato flipped the page to the side as he examined the seal again, mumbling to himself quietly. After a few moments, he looked back up to the group. "It seems my daughter was right. Each page has a specific rule that must be followed. From what I can tell," he said, pointing at one of the small inscriptions on the note, holding 2 in each hand. Shaking the pages in his right hand first, "These 2 can only be activated with a male with black eyes and black hair, and the ones in my left can only be opened with a girl with green eyes and black hair." He finished, making the room fall silent again. All eyes turned to Sai and Shizuka. Both genin blinked in surprise as they got handed their respected pages. Shizuka clutched the pages tightly as she looked at the seal. Sai did the same as he raised a dark eyebrow in confusion. Minato noticed the boy's hesitation and nodded his head supportively. "Don't worry about it. Nothing bad will happen if you open it. There isn't any sign of danger." "No, that isn't it, Hokage-sama." Sai shook his head as he reached into his pouch and pulled out another folder. "We also wanted to show you this, a note we found after infiltrating their base." Minato grabbed the note from the boy's hand and read through it carefully, his eyes narrowing in suspicion the more times he took to read it. He glanced upwards, noticing the unnerved faces of the shinobi in front of him. He asked what this was as he turned the note around, looking for anything out of the ordinary. Anko spoke this time. It seems to be a fortune that was given to one of the group members, and it has scarily accurate predictions. Enko said, walking over to Minato as he placed a note on his desk and read aloud. A battle of blue and red commences. Scorching earth with a magnificent blue hue, where a soundless room will stand, awaiting visitors and secret information. Once the hue has been smothered, a boy is his killer, allowing for an outstanding debut. To meet on the next full moon, in a land made of frozen colorless white. I take it the battle they are referring to is about Naruto and Sasuke. Minato said. Sai spoke this time. That's the assumption we came up with as well. And as Enko-sensei previously mentioned, the cabin we were in apparently had a soundproof seal placed inside of it somewhere, making it impossible to hear anything outside or inside. I had no idea you guys found something like this. Why didn't you tell me? Naruto said, reading the note over as he stepped closer to Enko. The purple-haired Jounin grinned as she slapped him over the head. Well, you said we had to wait to hear how you beat Sasuke, so I decided to make you wait on this, she said playfully, and Naruto only glared at her, crossing his arms with a huff. But, Naruto, we wanted to ask you. We assumed the battle between blue and red was you and Sasuke, but we couldn't identify what the red could mean for Sasuke. Did anything stand out to you? Shizuka said, and Naruto felt his body tense up. Shit, could the red actually be referring to my Sharingan? It could even mean that blood jutsu I had used against him. He thought frantically as all eyes turned to him, all expecting an answer. Ignoring Narumi's suspicious glance over to him, he racked his brain, trying to see anything he could pin onto Sasuke. Putting more distance between him and his team, he scratched the back of his head. His head started to rumble as his new tenant began speaking to him, telling Naruto to repeat after him. Well, you see, Sasuke never used his blue fire against me. Said I wasn't worth it. Naruto lied, thanking the Bijou once again, and the group merely nodded at his explanation. He was the only one who fought him after all, so they would have to take his word. To meet on the next full moon, in a land made of frozen colorless white, Minato said, rubbing his chin in thought. His eyes glanced to his stack of paperwork and widened his eyes, snapping his fingers. A land of colorless white. That would have to be Yukigekure, he said, making the group look at him in realization. I see. Then if we want to get to the bottom of this, we would have to travel to Yukigekure in time for the next full moon, Sai said, and Minato nodded. He was certain that the meeting place in question had to be Yukigekure. Strangely, the village has been on his mind for the past few days. While it puzzled him why he kept going back to the letter he had received, he didn't feel it was important. Until now. He placed a fortune down and asked Sai and Shizuka to channel their chakra into their respective pages he handed them earlier. Both genin did so without hesitation. After a moment of concentration, 4 quiet poofs were heard, and gone were the sales logs. Now Sai and Shizuka both held 2 folded post-it notes. The group held their breath as the 2 genin opened the notes slowly. Sai was the first one to speak, raising an eyebrow in confusion. This says there will be a meeting taking place in Wave Country regarding a man named Gato who's trying to overthrow that whole country. Mine says in Yukigekure there has been a surprising case of people disappearing in a town called Roka, specifically young kids. Enko stepped forward and straightened herself as she watched her 2 genin read off the notes. She focused her deep brown eyes on the notes, specifically in order to take a closer look. She felt Naruto and Narumi shift a little closer to her to get a better advantage point. While she was very skeptical about the legitimacy of this so-called fortune they had found, she couldn't help but feel slightly unnerved by its accuracy, especially since the only 2 people who could have opened the pages needed very specific rules they had to follow. And what are the odds that their team had both of the requirements? It didn't seem like a big coincidence anymore to the purple-haired Jounin. It seemed real. She looked back up to the yondaime. They shared a nod as they communicated silently. Minato stood up from his desk, gathering the attention back onto him. Picking up the evidence they have acquired, he started to speak. I will take these and see if I can find anything else that could be useful. I will also try and find out when the next full moon will be. With a lead like this, we can't just ignore this, he said, gathering smirks from the group. With a smirk of his own, he continued. I will call each of you back in here once I find out when the full moon would be. For now you are all dismissed. Yes, Hokage-sama. Yes, Tusan. One by one they had started to leave as Minato vanished in a flash of yellow. Once outside the Hokage building, Naruto turned to his team, smiling slightly as he stretched his arm. "Do you guys want to get some extra training in since we were back home?" he asked and frowned when he saw all three of them shake their heads. Shizuka gave him a small smile as an apology, but shook her head again. "Sorry, Naruto, but I'm beat. Probably going to take a nap," she said, and Naruto nodded, his shoulders slumping forward slightly. He turned to Sai. "My apologies, Blondie-kun, but Danzo-sama had asked me to report to him after our mission," he said, his eyes flashing apologetically for a moment. "Yeah, and I'm going to see if Kakashi is free. Could use some man time, you know," she said, making Shizuka blush slightly at her implications, making Anko laugh again. She patted Naruto on the head as she grinned mischievously. "You know, Blondie, I could see what Kuchan is doing. Maybe she could spare some of her free time for you," she said, and Naruto felt his face flush. He scoffed as he slapped her arm away in embarrassment. She only laughed harder as she shinned away. Sai nodded before walking in the opposite direction. Shizuka turned back to Naruto and gave a smile. "I'll see you later, Naruto," she said before she started on her way home, leaving Naruto alone in front of the Hokage Tower. Well, not completely alone. Just as he was about to walk away, he felt a hand grip tightly onto his shoulder. Naruto felt himself scowl as he tilted his head, narrowing his blue eyes. He stayed silent as he waited for her to speak. Her lips were pursed as her blue orbs remained unmoving as she stared at him. Naruto felt like her eyes were dissecting him, trying to get to know who her brother was. She focused on his eyes, blue eyes that she used to recognize as her younger brother, the perfect shade of azul that now had an aura of mystery and deceit. But they also held a large amount of warmth that betrayed his piercing expression. But Narumi couldn't remember when he had looked at her or his family with that amount of warmth. The air grew thicker as the two Namakes stayed silent. The immense pressure that had started to build had attracted many of the passers-by, several stopping to see what the two Namakes' children would do. The chattering in the street seemed to quiet down significantly. Narumi took a confident step forward, closing the distance between the two of them as she looked down on him. She wasn't much taller than him, only by a few inches, but it was enough to make our blonde hero look up at her, his face indifferent. "I know Tusen bought your whole 'I got lucky' shtick, but I won't. I know you're hiding something from me and Ai-chan, and I intend on finding out what it is," she said smoothly, her tone sharp as her words cut his skin. Narumi tightened her grip on his shoulder. She just couldn't believe that her brother had managed to kill a Jounin-level shinobi all alone. He barely had any training to begin with. She believed Naruto had to be hiding something, a power or jutsu that made him stronger. She couldn't chalk it up to just getting lucky. Naruto scoffed at Narumi, forcefully pushing her hand off his shoulder as he glared harshly at his sister. He blinked, finally breaking eye contact. He tried to get his annoyance under control as he regained his bearings. "You can believe whatever it is you want to believe in. It doesn't make a difference to me whatsoever," Naruto said, breaking the silence that had reformed, making Narumi scowl. The redhead watched as her brother took several steps away from her. She couldn't stop the next words out of her mouth, even if she had wanted to. "Since when has it been okay for you to keep things away from your family, that you would even lie straight to our faces?" she asked, making Naruto stop dead on his tracks. She wasn't prepared for the dark look Naruto had sent her way. She would have swore she watched one of his eyes flash gold for a second. "Since when have we been a family, Narumi? Don't try and make me feel guilty for something you all have done to me. I won't take your shit anymore. I don't owe you anything," he said, his voice dropping several octaves as Narumi clenched her fists, matching her brother's glare perfectly. She barely registered what Naruto had said, irritation bleeding through into her expression. She was starting to get fed up with Naruto's stubbornness on returning to his family. He kept pulling further and further away from them, and she was tired of it. Before she could respond further, Naruto was gone from her line of sight, lost in the crowd of people, and she couldn't even sense his chakra signature. She growled as she slid her tongue over her canines. She stormed off back to her house, annoyance building in her with each step. One day, Naruto and one day, I will learn what you're hiding. 6 hours later. Remember, try and feel the chakra inside. Let the blood flow grab your attention, and try and make it your own. Naruto nodded slowly as he sat with his legs crossed on the floor. He took a deep breath as he closed his eyes in concentration. After his spat with Narumi, he needed to blow off some steam, so he decided to go to his new favorite training area in the village. The small clearing that was close to Training Ground 99, the very place he had met Kurenai for the first time. He has only come here once after he met her 5 years ago. He usually went to Ground 99, but he wanted to take extra precaution with working on his blood jutsu. While he knew next to nothing about what this style of jutsu was capable of, he was glad that he had Aisabu to help teach him. So after about 2 hours of intense cardio and genjutsu training, the last 4 hours he dedicated himself to try and figure out how the inner workings of the mysterious style of jutsu. The small gnawing sound echoes in the clearing as Naruto formed a singular hand sign, channeling his chakra as he opened his eyes. Making eye contact with the pinned-down squirrel on the floor, Naruto finally breathed out as the squirrel only tilted his head to the side. Looking at Naruto in confusion, Naruto groaned as he lowered his hands and rubbed his arm. So far, the only thing he knew he could do with the blood jutsu was basically the same thing he could do with water, basic manipulation much like the spiral blade he had formed to kill Sasuke. But that only left him with more questions than answers. So he tried to practice on manipulating the blood inside the squirrel he had captured to see if he could possibly control the animal or kill it from the inside. Results showed that it was impossible to physically manipulate the blood in another body, but if it was outside of the body, then it was a free game for the blonde. He made several small cuts on the squirrel, letting the blood slowly leak from the tail. While it was a little difficult to manipulate the blood once it was freed from the body, it was around the same basics for water chakra. It just consumed twice the normal amount of chakra to actually use a jutsu. Well, that's the way Aisabu explained it to Naruto. Since blood was more dense and a thicker substance, it required more and more chakra in order to change its shape. It was why Naruto suffered from chakra exhaustion after only using one blood-style jutsu. He tried to use his Sharingan on the squirrel along with the blood style to see if the Jujutsu would have an effect in controlling the blood in one's body. Sadly, the Sharingan did no such thing. It held no positive or negative impact for blood style. Naruto sighed as he let the squirrel free, watching as the critter ran away from him and jumping back into the forest happily. He deactivated his Sharingan as he sat in thought. So we figured out that it's most likely impossible to control the blood in another living creature. But once the blood is spilled, I can manipulate it. But it takes a far more amount of chakra to do so. He internally mused as he grabbed a kunai from his pouch and placed the blade on his arm. He took a deep breath before he sliced the blade across his skin, wincing from the pain as the smell of copper flowed up into his nose. He placed the kunai onto the grass and hovered his palm over the cut, watching as his blood slowly leaked down his arm. He started to channel his chakra again. After a moment, the blood from his wound had started to float upwards. The blood started to take shape into a small-sized ball, almost looking like a red water balloon as he concentrated to keep the shape. He flipped his hand upwards, allowing the ball to float perfectly upright above his palm. Before Naruto had any time to celebrate, the ball then popped, splashing him with his own blood as he coughed in surprise. He cursed as he wiped his face clean. Well, that was a good start. It takes less chakra to form something with my blood, he thought as he looked down to his previously injured arm, tracing his fingers over the cut he had placed on his tanned skin. The cut was already completely sealed itself shut, not a blemish in sight. After consulting Aisabu, the Bijou explained that his blood, if he chose to, Naruto could begin to heal any injuries on his body. All he had to do was channel the chakra into a specific part in his bloodstream, allowing his white blood cells to act fast and start healing his injuries at a rapid rate. Naruto was elated to find that out. While he wasn't sure if he could save his life from anything to life-threatening, it definitely would help in the midst of battle. A sudden idea popped into his head as he picked up the kunai once more and brought it over to his unblemished arm. He was about to slice as a loud, scared voice reached his ears. "Naruto-kun, what are you doing?" Kurenai Yuhi had to resist the urge to sigh as she walked side by side with her date for the evening, Asuma Saratobi. Yesterday evening, he had asked her to dinner as a way of catching up after weeks of team training. She was certainly surprised when he had asked her out. She had thought he had no interest in her since he has been so standoffish for the past couple of weeks. But that wasn't why she had to fight back a sigh. In fact, they actually had a pleasant dinner date. He would ask her about her genjutsu and how she was improving, how her team was doing, and they would swap stories from the past. All in all, it was a great time, and Asuma acted like a complete gentleman. But the thing was, she didn't know the attraction she felt for him anymore. Asuma was starting to open up to her a lot more now, and he even began flirting regularly, slipping in a sweet comment whenever he could. While she was flattered, it didn't make her heart skip a beat like it had used to. In fact, it didn't do anything to her, but she couldn't deny the attraction she felt towards the Saratobi. She was confused. So the two of them made small talk as he dropped her off on her doorstep. She turned around and gave Asuma a small smile. He returned it with one of his own, flashing his teeth as he stepped closer to Kurenai. "I'm glad you went out with me tonight, Kurenai. Maybe we can do it again sometime." His voice was deep, trying to add every ounce of coolness into his words. Kurenai wasn't phased in the slightest as she gave a small nod. "Maybe we will," she said, making Asuma's smile grow wider. Kurenai forced herself to suck in a breath as she watched the taller man slightly close his eyes and lean towards her. It was soft and sweet when his larger lips slightly pecked hers. She made no notion to fight the kiss, nor did she return it. She felt nothing. Asuma pulled away and wished Kurenai a good night. Kurenai returned the gesture as she watched Asuma walk away, a slight spring in his step as the people walking in the street looked at him in confusion. She felt herself frown, slightly regretting the idea of another date with the man. She stayed on her doorstep for a few minutes before walking down the steps and making her way to her favorite training area. Her thoughts quickly flashed to Naruto for a moment, remembering how they first met. On her way to the training spot, she couldn't help but have a quick spike of worry. It's been 4 days since he had left on his first C-rank mission, which was odd since his team was only doing a simple delivery. And from what she remembered from what Naruto told her, it was to Tazuna Town, a village right next to Konoha. It only took a few hours to get there. Shaking her worries away, her eyes lit up as she saw the forest clearing come into view. She could always rely on training to brighten up her mood. Maybe she could even try and create a new genjutsu. She chuckled to herself at her thoughts before stepping into the wide open space. She waited for a moment for her eyes to adjust, since there wasn't too much light that shined into the clearing. Blinking, she focused her vision until she saw the very same blonde who had been just occupying her thoughts, her eyes widening as she witnessed him slowly put the kunai closer to his arm, ready to slice it open. The shock only lasted for a second before fear tore into her heart. She reacted quickly as she sprinted off towards him, a yell forcing its way out of her mouth. "And Naruto-kun, what are you doing?" Naruto looked up in surprise as he didn't have to react, as a sudden red and white blur tackled him to the ground. He yelped in surprise as he fell to the ground. He felt his arms get pinned above his head, the grip tight as ever as he tried to focus his vision on who was crazy enough to tackle him. Looking up, he felt his face flush deeply. His eyes, opening wide as soft black locks of hair, had started to tickle his cheeks. Deep crimson eyes looked down on him with worry, unshed tears forming in them as her body hovered over Naruto. She was between his legs as the coconut scent from her shampoo had started to invade Naruto's senses, making the blonde's blush heat up rapidly. Words failed to escape his throat as he found himself lost within her eyes, ruby gemstones looking at him with concern that sent his heart soaring to the moon. "She's beautiful," he subconsciously thought, his body tensing as he felt her hot breath caress his skin. "Naruto-kun, what are you thinking? Why you can't do this?" she said, pleading even as her eyes glanced to the kunai that fell limp next to him, her eyes glowing wide as she saw the tip already red, stained with his blood. She tore her eyes away as she started to scan over the boy's arms, frantically looking for any signs of damage on the boy's flesh. Naruto blinked in confusion at Kurenai, a blush still prominent on his face as he tried to figure out what caused the sudden hysteria. Naruto-kun, why would you do something like this? We can get through this, I promise you, Kurenai said as she turned his arm over, continuing her search. Naruto followed her line of sight, confusion bubbling into him. He glanced between her, looking at his arm and the blood-stained kunai next to him. The gears in his head started to quicken as his mind finally realized what it must have looked like he was doing. He offered the jounin above him an awkward smile after he gained her attention. Kurenai-san. Kurina-san, it's okay, I promise you. But you were Dash. I can explain. She looked at him with a critical eye as he spoke, not believing him in the slightest. He saw the woman's hesitation leak into her expression, and he nodded. I promise I will explain. But you would have to get off of me to do so, he stuttered out, looking away in embarrassment. Kurenai blinked as she looked down, her face going pink as she quickly apologized and hopped off of Naruto, taking an embarrassed seat next to the blonde. Shursui had died. She always wished she could have dedicated more time to him when he was younger. But this has been the only year since she had become a jounin that she actually had more free time. Jounin senseis really had a lot of leeway, and she couldn't help but be proud at how much Naruto has improved. His teachings with Shursui and Anko must have really paid off, and paired with his new Dojutsu and blood jutsu. She shivered at that thought, wondering just how strong the boy in front of her would become. As she watched him get to his feet, she let her vision linger on him for a few moments. That's right, he's just a boy, she thought to herself, a tinge of sadness etched in her thoughts. The next day, 8 a.m., why didn't you tell her about me? It just didn't seem right. She said to herself she was overloaded, and shit, how could I tell her when we don't even know how this happened? It would just bring up questions that can't be answered. I suppose you are right. She did seem to take it well enough. Naruto nodded to Isabu, walking down the streets of Konoha. He had spent the night at Shikamaru's place again, since he didn't want to be bothered with facing Narumi at home. The lazy Nara and his family accepted him with open arms, which he graciously appreciated. The Nara genius sat him down, and they talked for hours as they played a few rounds of shogi. He told Shikamaru about his first C-rank mission, and he wasn't shocked in the slightest at how far things had escalated. He only gave a half sigh. He beat Naruto in another round. It's not surprising that you find yourself in these troublesome situations. Naruto couldn't help but snicker as his words echoed in his mind. His best friend sure didn't seem to have a care in the world. He really envied him. But sadly, morning came all too soon for Naruto, and the moment he stepped out of the Nara household, an Umbu was already outside waiting for him, informing the blonde that the Hokage needed to see him immediately. He was saddened to hear that his father needed to see him so early. It wasn't even 9 a.m. yet, and he was hoping he could see Kurenai again today, maybe even get in some extra genjutsu lessons. Thinking of the ruby-eyed woman, a large smile tugged at his lips. He really was thankful for her. She helped him in a time where he thought all was lost. Hey, Naruto! Naruto stopped his walk as he turned around at the call of his name. Looking back, he saw Shizuka run up next to him. Naruto found himself curious as to why his teammate had such an excited look on her face. She had a spring in her step as she stopped and looked at him, her smile growing wider. Hey, Shizuka, what's up? He asked as they both started walking again. Meanwhile, Shizuka was eager to get to the Hokage Tower. She knew a bit of surprise was in order, and was slightly confused on why the boy next to her didn't seem to share her excitement. Do you not know? Sai said he was going to come and tell you. Naruto looked at her in confusion again, raising an eyebrow as she slowly shook his head. No, I haven't seen Sai all morning. Did something happen? Yeah. He said Hokage-sama figured out when the next full moon is, and he's assigning our squad to take care of it. What? Really? Naruto yelled back, shock entering his system as the beast inside of him hummed in delight. He didn't think the Hokage would find out when the next full moon would be, and he really didn't think he would assign Team 11 to the mission. This was easily a B-rank mission or higher, maybe even borderline A rank. His team was capable. He finally felt like he was finally progressing in training since they had returned. A large portion would have to be from killing Sokka and the Bijou inside him. But it was rare for a Genin team to take a B-rank mission. The only time any new Genin were allowed the pleasure was during war, when it was inevitable. Excitement pumped through him as he and Shizuka engaged in small talk before getting to the Hokage Tower. After entering the tower, they were quickly granted access to the Yondame's office. Naruto opened the door and was shocked to see that the rest of his team was already inside. They offered the two of them a small smile, in greeting which they returned happily. Glancing over to his left, his shock seemed to grow as he saw his sister standing next to the Hokage's desk. She offered him a hesitant nod in greeting, one where he didn't return. Standing next to Narumi was the face of a woman he had just seen last night. Blinking in surprise, he smiled wide as he greeted her happily, one she returned, neither noticing the confused expression Minato sent their way, the teasing smirk of Anko, or the tightening of Narumi's hands. Minato coughed to gather the group's attention. All shinobi snapped into place. Shizuka taking a stand next to Anko while Naruto took his next to Kurenai. The Yondame produced 2 scrolls from his desk, one white and the other blue. He handed the blue one to Anko and the white one to Kurenai. Thank you all for coming. I assure you this debriefing will not take long. This is concerning the strange fortune that Team 11 had brought back from their latest mission. I had already explained everything to Kurenai here, so you guys don't need to worry about confusing her, he said, making the group nod in understanding. After countless hours last night, and into the early morning meet, and a special team managed to figure out that the next full moon will be precisely on September 28th. September 28th? That is over a month away, Hokage-sama, Anko said with confusion. He only nodded his head as he leaned back into his chair, eyes narrowing in thought. While it is a month away, and we do have some leeway, my mind couldn't help but ponder the 2 interesting details in the notes that Shizuka-chan and Saikuen had opened. About Wave Country and Yukige Cure, he said, waiting for all eyes to be on him before continuing. About a man named Gato who's trying to overthrow Wave Country, and the kids disappearing in Yukige Cure, which is why both Jounin and the room have a scroll. Those 2 scrolls hold your mission details. Enko-chan will head over to Wave Country with Shizuka-chan and Saikuen to try and find any information about Gato. If he manages to successfully overthrow Wave, then a large amount of our trading resources will be lost. And Kurenai-chan will head over to Yukige Cure with Naruto-kun and Narumi-chan to see what the disappearances in Roka are all about. I can't help but believe that the fortune you guys found has to be referring to Roka. Hokage-sama, if I may. Anko said, taking a step forward. Minato nodded as he turned to face her. If I may ask, why are you separating Team 11? We all work well together and know each other's strengths and weaknesses and can compensate for one another. I'll be honest with you all, he started, taking a deep breath. The reason I have separated you wasn't because I don't trust you together. It was mainly due to the difference in mission. Enko-chan, while it's true that placing Naruto-kun on your team would be beneficial, he is most important in the Yukige Cure mission. He and Kurenai-chan are both adept in genjutsu and can slip around more easily in unknown territory. Accompanied with Narumi-chan, who is a superb censor, will have no problems infiltrating the town, he said, making their eyes flash in realization. And your mission in Wave is less of an infiltration and more of a protection mission. You guys, if need be, will have to take out Gato with interfering with our ally. No doubt, Wave, once they catch wind of this, would be happy to let us aid them in any way possible. And let's face it, Anko, you are more of a fan of takeout missions than a regular infiltration, he said with a grin. The purple-headed Jounin couldn't help but return the grin, flashing her white teeth in understanding. She bowed before stepping back into place between Sai and Shizuka. You both leave today, and will spend the next month in the respective towns before returning home. Team Anko, I trust you 3 to take care of this rather effortlessly, and if you guys manage to complete the mission before the full moon, then I give you permission to head over to Yukige Cure to assist Team Kurenai, he stated, making Team Anko nod. And Team Kurenai, you are not to return until the full moon has passed. If you do need to inform me of anything, have Narumi use a toad summon to send me a letter. And I want you guys to do everything you can to help with the disappearances in Roka. If my hunch is correct, then you will find the answer there. And if it isn't, then we just look good in the eyes of Yukigakure. He finished making Team Kurenai nod. He turned his body to Kurenai, offering a small bow, and Kurenai, do not worry about teammate. I had already informed their respective clans about your mission, and they had agreed to take over their individual training until you return. And if they so choose, then they could undergo D-rank missions together as well in your absence. Your presence on this mission was most definitely needed. Kurenai bowed gracefully, happy to hear that her team was already looked out after. She thanked him. Thank you, Okasama. Team Enko will leave from the East Gate, and Team Kurenai will leave from the North Gate in 1 hour. Everyone dismissed. Thank you for watching part 2 of What If Naruto Was Neglected by His Family and Had Every Elemental Bloodline. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Anime T23 for more exciting What If scenarios and anime content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next episode.